think. Are we live?
Yeah, I think we might be live. We don't have a flashy intro video for this newfangled creation of ours, so hello everybody, welcome. I'm Frater RC, welcome to ARCANA SYNAXIS number 2. 2 times you're getting us, and with plans for ongoing monthly things, so welcome to everyone here. We have Ike Baker from ARCANA Podcast. We have Frater Eleftheria from Lifting the Lamp Down Under. That's not the name of the podcast, but he just happens to be down under. And Sky of Philosophical Minds. And he's just too cool for school, so he just has his first name there, like Madonna. Welcome, everybody, to the show. We have a plan for you tonight. Don't worry, we're not that organized. We're just pretending to be. And what we're going to do is talk about things that occur to us. But then, when we run out of things, we have each a segment planned for you. I'm going to talk a bit about the Hermetic prayer of Thanksgiving. Sky's going to talk about Neptune and Jupiter and some other Greek words I can't pronounce. Ike is going to talk about desert fathers and spiritual warfare, and Eleftheria is going to drag us kicking and screaming into the realm of the Pistis Sophia. Which means this episode will be very much almost as Christian as the last one, which should do great wonders for the algorithm. So please help us out with a comment below, share the episode, send us a super chat to interject with a question. Otherwise, at the end of each segment, we'll get to the questions at the end and talk to you guys about whatever your comments are and what you think. But we're also just going to shoot the breeze, and that's how we're going to start off. We're just going to start off with shooting the breeze, and as we did in seminary, we would start with a little check-in. So let's start with a little check-in. How are you doing? Who wants to check in? Let's start with Ike, who is joining us from the sanctum in his bathrobe.
Are you not entertained? It's cold. But this is a nice plush Ralph Lauren bathrobe that I've had for probably like 8 years. And I'm very comfortable. I'm really excited to do this. It was so much fun the first time. And, anybody that's watched me be on podcasts, you just regularly watch me lose my mind and ramble and rant, and it can turn into a real shit show really quickly. But so they're not always fun, but this was so much fun. And I really I'm so thrilled to be here with you guys. I don't know what's necessarily new. I will at some point plug my courses for anybody that wants to come and take some classes with me. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the Desert Fathers. I'm excited to talk about the Hermetic texts. I'm interested to see what you guys have up your sleeves. We've kind of we've been back and forth on Signal, Messenger, and stuff like that, kind of plotting this out. But I'm really excited to have to see the big reveal for each one of you. That's my spiel.
Sky, how's it going by you?
It's going. Been trying to tap into some organizational Saturnian vibes in preparation for this. And so that had brought me some interesting thoughts and revelations that I think are relevant. But I've got a yerba mate, I've got brewski, and I'm all set and I'm ready to rock and roll. And I think
you have the magical combo.
Yes.
Yes,
how about
elves
yourself?
do rule the world. Eleftheria, yeah, how's Eleftheria doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. In terms of what's been happening with me, that book that I keep talking about in my videos is coming along and is almost finished. Detailing some of the angelic workings that I've done, Enochian workings that I've done, and the results of those. So the final proof, the proof is on its way via some international shipping or something. But yeah, once a few little kind of formatting things are sorted out. That's going to be ready to go. So I'm very excited about that. Sometime early this year, I'm planning on publishing that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this discussion as well. I really enjoyed it the last time. Be interesting to see how everything fits together. I'm sure that there will be some similarities between. Oh, never mind. It looked like I was commenting just then. That was weird. Yeah. So
By location.
yeah, maybe.
Did we all say hi, y'all, or was that? Did it have? Some...
I think that's automated from. Yeah, we'll have to have a word with the AI overlord.
All right. Hopefully we haven't been hacked. But anyway, but yeah. So I'm looking forward to looking at how Hermeticism and Gnosticism are similar, and maybe there's a bit of cross-pollination there and some cool stuff that was happening in Alexandria back in the day that meant that everyone was kind of doing similar things, and they had the Egyptian thing influencing them. And but yeah, we'll see where it goes today. In case I start fading like last time, I've also got a beverage in here. I've got a cherry Coke. But yeah, looking forward to it.
So RC,
all right.
I saw that Litwa is doing a anathema publication of the Hermetica, and that's pretty badass. I know that.
Wait, hold on. So Gabriel would want me to interject here. So fount is something different.
I'm so sorry, fount.
Yeah, it's not anathema.
Yes.
So it's they're like side by side, but they're different entities.
Valid point.
I was gonna let him finish first, but
no worries.
yeah, why not? Sorry, Sky. Yeah, fount, anathema. They're different, but same, but different.
So yeah, shout out to them. And for people that aren't aware, you did the audio to that book, right?
Yeah. First, we got to quickly pause and say hello to Dr. Terry Burns from Wisconsin. Thanks for dropping by, Terry, and giving us a line. I hope I saw you just posted a picture of a 5 p.m. somewhere margarita, and I was very jealous. So cheers to you wherever you are out there in Wisconsin, doing your thing. It's gonna be great to see you again. Yeah, we'll see Terry again soon at EnochiaCon 2026, and even Frater Eleftheria is presenting there again, and possibly in person. Ike is there, so that's going to be fun. We're excited for that. Glad to be here. Yeah, what were we talking about? Oh yes. Oh yeah. So it's funny. I did do the audible book so Dr. Litwa put out on his own after the universities decided they didn't have room after all the universities of the world decided they didn't need a leading scholar in these ancient studies and texts in early Christianity for some reason. Don't ask me why, because I'll tell you the truth. No. He put out the Hermetica 1, and he had already put out Hermetica 2 through Oxford University Press, which is the technical Hermetica, and it covers even what we would consider some magical techniques in very short segments of text. But the Hermetica 1 is the Asclepius and all the other great texts of the Corpus Hermeticum. And as I was doing the audiobook for it on Audible, which I highly recommend, you guys can sign up to Audible, get it for free, listen to it. It was, a lot of work, 3 months of work, all in all, and it's 7 hours of me reciting and reading the Hermetica for Dr. Litwa using my best microphone, not this one I use for you plebs out there listening to us now, but the good microphone, the one I keep in a secret place. That sounds bad for some reason, but okay. Yeah, no, it was a Neumann KMS 105. It's a good mic. So I used a good mic to use proper sound setup, good sound, post-sound editing, and I'm very proud of it. Check out Dr. David Litwa's Hermetica 1 on Audible, but you might want to hold off getting the paperback because Anathema Publishing and their new division, Fount, which is being run, I believe, in part at least by Dr. Ian C. Edwards, who's also been on my podcast, a great author, great psychologist. I think he's partly running it, but the formatting, the design, the copy editing that they're doing at Anathema and now Fount is obviously superb. So go to Anathema Publishing or Fount Publishing. I don't know the actual web address. I think it's probably fount.com, but that might not be right. You can go to Anathema and you'll find it for sure. It's going to be an amazingly beautiful book in paperback as well as gorgeous hardcover with, you know, the gold overlays with embossing, or whatever they call it, embossing of Thoth on the cover, and the deluxe edition, of course, will be super beautiful. So you can get finally a altar-worthy copy of this text. And I was calling it from the beginning. I was telling David that I considered it that he's given us the Hermetic Bible, and I guess I kept saying it so much he started using it in the promo materials, because how can you not use something like that when someone keeps saying it? And I do believe it's true. And so it's coming out, and throughout all of doing the audible narration in those hours, and so many hours, you know, actually when I agreed to do it, when I offered to do it, asked to do it, you know, because it was a gift, I thought it was 20,000 words, and it turned out it was like 65, 70,000 words. So instead of a couple weeks work, it was a few months work. And then, you know, going back and correcting errors and things like that. And he did say it was the best audible or narration audiobook he had ever had done for him. And he's been hiring people for years. So I'm very pleased that not only did I do my best work, but that it was recognized. And I'm very proud of that. It's honestly, if I died just being known for that audiobook, I would be pleased as punch. That might not sound exciting to some of you, but yeah, that's just how much it means to me. And also his reorganization of the text as a pathway of initiation really does give us what we've always wondered, which is, how do you read this thing? How do you use it? Right? Do you just sprinkle it in here and there? That's what I used to do with my Yogi Publication Society version back in the 90s. But even reading it then, I could tell that there was probably some issues with the translation. Just, you know, phrases like providence is the minister of necessity. I couldn't really see them using the word minister so much, you know, let alone the Greek word, original word presbyter. And the word providence just didn't sound very ancient. I'm sure it's a valid translation in certain cases, but yeah, Litwa has done a far the superior job to all previous texts, retranslating them all, including the Nag Hammadi Coptic fragments. He teaches Coptic as well, so there you go. There will be more news to come on it as we go along, but that's my overall spiel, which I think is an experience I'm pleased to share with you all, because it was a really powerful and beautiful experience for me as well. So that's what I got to say about that.
It's nice to see that text honored in the way that it deserves.
At last. I mean, if people like Crowley and Mathers and Westcott, clearly they knew, especially from getting into the text to the level I have now, and doing Dr. Litwa also has a course on the Hermetica, which you can get for a song, and it's a great course. Like the depth of knowledge that we have at a preliminary level today, all kind of dwarfs what they would have had 100 years ago. But even as I say that, I feel like you have to be very cautious, because the more I study this text, the more I realize how deep people like Westcott and Mathers' knowledge was. And I use Mathers and Westcott as an example of any of the great occultists of the last 500 years, right? Ficino first did the first translation. It was incomplete and highly problematic. Missed the core message, you could say, in a gross kind of blatant way. Basically, Ficino translated it to be that the highest we can achieve is through reason, but the actual text is to achieve the highest, you have to go beyond reason. So that's quite a big error, eh? Like, that's like, oops. It's like, that's not how you change a tire. So, but he was upset when he found out it was published. He didn't prepare it for publication. He translated it for the De Medicis and was upset when they just put it out incomplete and half-assed, as he would probably agree. So finally today we have an ability to understand the Hermetica and the Hermetic tradition on such a deep level. And not only that, you use it as a guidepost for our own path, whether we walk the way of Hermes or some other ancient Gnostic version of that kind of journey up to our nous, our intuition, our holy daimon, our higher consciousness, so that we can die and put on the fire tunic and become like the star gods and angels, only better, because we once were human, and that made us also dying gods, now risen to be super star gods. I think that's the phrase. Super star gods is what I'll say from now on.
Is there? It sounds like somebody's like hitting a bong in the background in one of your.
It does.
I'm not sure what that is. If somebody has like something cooking, or it's just like this little weird, like rattling sound that I'm seeing some people react to in the comments. Yeah, there it is. What is that?
Now you've said the bong hit thing. I can't unhear it.
Yeah, like where is that coming from?
All we could do is each mute ourselves in order and see whose sounds cuts it. It's gone. It's gone.
Okay.
Must be me.
Yeah, that would make sense with the bong ripping. No, I'm joking. Yeah, you know what the thing is about the Hermetica though? I find that it's easier for people to project bias into than other texts, and I feel like that's why it's more favored by academia, because it's easier for academics to be able to sort of superimpose and play with the language and in what they call, nuance, which is part of really it's a term that they use to apply their methodology, but methodology is bias. It's just it's a different term. It's methodology is academic bias. So it's, I have seen the Hermetica whitewashed a little bit when it's more in agreement with Neoplatonic ideas regarding the soul than I think many are willing to admit, because we're framing it in kind of this anachronistic view of it being a quintessentially Egyptian wisdom tradition. And the thing is they don't use Egyptian terms whatsoever. And now it's not about just using the words, but it's about they're using philosophical terms, Greek, Platonic, Neoplatonic philosophical terms in context, right? If you were just to superimpose the word logistikon or nous or something like that, if you were just to superimpose it for ba or whatever you want to, however you want to call it, you'd have to move the context around. But by and large, in a lot of the original texts, particularly in the Corpus Hermeticum, they're using these things in context. They have the same context, these words, these philosophical variables, almost they're terms that they're used in the Neoplatonic. And I'm going to get into that because it eventually it's really this clash, not even a clash, but like a meeting of the Greco-Egyptian that really influences early Christianity. I personally, and I know quite a few others, who are a little bit more open to this idea, and people who have been saying it probably longer than I have, Christianity itself is more Hellenistic than it is quintessentially, a Jewish heresy. It's got more in common with Hellenic views or Hellenistic views of the soul and transcendence, soul flight, so on and so forth. But we'll get into all of that. But I like the Hermetica very, very much because it's so broad and there are so many different interpretations. But I certainly think that it's not. I've never read a version that doesn't have some kind of angle. But that's the thing. We're human beings. We're kind of never going to escape that, no matter how hard we try.
Yeah, I'm curious about when you say when you talk Christian is very Hellenistic. One of the things that interests me about Christianity, though, is how in its beginning it didn't have the idea of a soul, really, or an immortal soul that we live on after death. It believed in the resurrection of the physical body. And so at some point, I think it became much more Hellenistic, because that's not really a Hellenistic idea, is it? The resurrection of the physical body?
No, I don't think so. But what mattered more to them was the pneumatic body. But certainly I would say the spiritual undercurrent of let's say the evolution of the soul of the person, so that they access the kingdom of heaven, right? Because he doesn't say the kingdom of heaven is waiting for you in the resurrection, when I come again. He says the kingdom of heaven is within you and without you. And so there's this impetus and towards internal states that I wanted to get into, versus the things you find in the Old Testament, like in the Ten Commandments or in the laws of Leviticus, which they're much more so about external taboos, whereas Christianity, like in things like the Sermon on the Mountain, of course, many of the things that Christ tells his followers, he doesn't tell them, he doesn't really the emphasis is more on their internal state. So he's saying, look, it is said that you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, but if you even think about it, you have committed that adultery. He puts the emphasis not on, thou shalt not lay with another man as one would lay with a woman, like in Leviticus. He doesn't put the emphasis on thou shalt not say take the Lord's name in vain. He says, the meek, blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth and this kind of stuff. And I think that is much more so in line with what's going on. And I also think that the Gospels in particular are, they're not, I personally, I think there's a lot of symbolism in them that is revealed if you understand the sort of surrounding traditions, where it's a very behavior based, the root of behavior, the internal state. It's based on that, and that's Platonic philosophy. That's Neoplatonic philosophy. It's all about where are the sources, where are the roots of this. And of course, there are many. There are also philosophical terms employed that are Greek throughout the New Testament as well.
Yeah, it's I think it's as Christianity is obviously a fusion of what Judaism was like at that time. I mean, that's where probably the body emphasis comes from, because Judaism didn't have much of an idea of an afterlife other than Sheol, where you went and not much happened. So they were all about celebrating this life, celebrating your family, your community, being alive, which of course is one of the beautiful things about Judaism. And we see that transmitted to Christianity through the St. Paul and Jesus and all of many of those writers, right? And then later on, it seems to have gotten a bit more focus on the afterlife rather than here. But also the apocalypticism of Paul is probably a major contributing factor to the looking to the hereafter, right? Because even if this is the kingdom of heaven, even if we're meant to create it here on earth or find it in ourselves here on earth, Paul still did have this sense of impending doom, which led to a lot of his social teachings, right? The reason you shouldn't get married and have kids isn't because it was wrong or dirty to have sex. It was because there's no point, because we're all about to go witness the second coming, And so, that's interesting. Anyone else?
Yeah,
thoughts?
I mean, the also, the word psyche, psychen, these terms specifically for soul, they are, Jesus does talk about them. They're kind of sprinkled throughout the four canonical gospels. He talks about, in Matthew 10, he talks about how, don't fear people who can kill just your body. fear God, who has, who the issues from death go to him, not just the body, but the soul. So there's some mention of it, although I think you are correct in the early theological communities that propped up, sort of contemporaneously with the quote unquote Christ event. Some of them, I would say, were interpreting the salvation as very much in the body. I think the Gnostics, right? There were Gnostic sects in the in the earliest days that who actually, they didn't even agree on whether or not Christ actually existed. Some of them thought it was purely symbolic. So there's a lot of disagreement in early Christianities, but if you follow where they do agree, that's what I'm looking for. And that's probably why I have such a hard time with academia, because academia, for very good reason, right? Somebody needs to be doing that work, but I don't want to do it. They cut things up into ever smaller pieces, and they're looking at things, how they don't relate, and trying to find that nuance that I said through their methodology. I'm more interested in finding where do these things actually connect, because that's going to tell me at the end of the day, what the fuck is actually going on? What's the message? What's the core? What's the vein of all this stuff, which is quite interesting. And I already see some shit talking in the comments about Christianity. So, thank you from my bathrobe.
I think I figured out the issue. Let me know if my mic sounds okay.
Okay,
Yep,
cool.
sounds pretty good to me.
Good. There's one comment I do want to address because it's just so timely. Thank you for the comment, Akianova. Jesus, among others, taught how to have a personal relationship with God. This is important because words, language, and reflected human understanding is a terrible medium to learn within. I agree with what you're saying about the noetic core of connecting with God, especially through Christ, if you're a Christian. But here's something interesting that I only would have learned, and only learned because I went to seminary. So Jesus didn't teach about a personal relationship with God. Jesus taught about a communal relationship with God, and that's extremely evidenced by early Christian writings. They rejected the idea of a personal relationship with God. They accepted the idea of communal salvation through the ecclesia, through the church. And what made you one of the holy, one of the hagioi, one of the saints, as it's later translated, is that you were part of a community that had accepted and celebrated the mysteries of, the way of Jesus of Nazareth. And so that's actually one of the features of modern Christianity, is over time, especially with the Reformation, we shifted from a communal salvation to personal salvation and experience with God. And it's an interesting change. It's an interesting shift, which you could definitely say reflects the move from the Piscean age to the Aquarian, if you wanted to be so bold.
Just on the conversation that we were having on the origins of Christianity, I think an important piece of the puzzle as well in understanding where this came from is looking at what was happening in, for example, the Qumran community in the couple of hundred years leading up to Jesus' ministry. You had a very different kind of more mystical Second Temple style Judaism that was happening there, which may or may not have influenced John the Baptist, who of course was Jesus' teacher. So there's stuff coming in from there. There's the Merkava mysticism that we're pretty certain Paul practiced, because he talks about going to the third heaven. So there's some interesting kind of mystical origin points for later Christian belief, both in terms of the Hellenistic stuff. I think undoubtedly there's evidence of that influence, but also some of this mystical Jewish stuff that was happening in the 200 years before.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's also like a lot of these communities were being transformed by what is called Hellenized Judaism. So, obviously a product of the Alexandrian conquests, but there was a lot of that thought proliferated, and really, it really was sort of it really was the Greeks interpreting and expressing in their own idiom Egyptian wisdom I would say for the most part. Thing is too, like I suspect that there's ancient Mesopotamian stuff going on too, the more I look into it, but I don't have access to that at the same depth, as the other stuff. So I don't know if any of you are more interested. I mean, I'm by the minute I'm like getting more interested in ancient Mesopotamian religion, but it's because it's absolutely just fascinating. But I if I had to guess, I'd say that the Egyptian and the Mesopotamian stuff were in some way, shape, or form related. I know more about the Egyptian than I do the Mesopotamian.
I mean, Maria the Jewess, or Maria Prophetissima, the first alchemist who taught Zosimos, the great Hermetic in Alexandria in the 3rd century, she said she got her alchemy from Babylon, right, from the Mesopotamians. So clearly, right there, you see the emergence of that wisdom from a Jewish woman, the first alchemist, being passed on into the Hermetic community, of course, into the melting pot that was Alexandria, or the hub of knowledge. So that, yeah, I mean, clearly we owe a lot to Mesopotamia.
Yeah, it's such a shame that we don't. That's why I like to talk to people that specialize in that stuff. And I mean, if you even go back to the Abrahamic faiths, right? This guy's name was Avram, and he came from Ur, and then he moved to Haran. I mean, these are Sumerian, Akkadian cities, and then a Sumerian god tells him, "Hey, get out of here, go into the desert, and I will deliver you to a land, and you'll be doing your own thing, but you got to leave here." So yeah, I mean, he had lived there for a long time in the household of his father and all this stuff, and in that country. So there had to have been a lot of crossover. And when you look back at it, actually, there's a lot of stuff. For instance, Babylonian gardens. I mean, the earliest versions of these sort of like kept gardens. They were stratified. The classic style of this in ancient Mesopotamia were these quartered gardens. They had 4 quarters, and you get the same thing in the Garden of Eden with the 4 rivers that run towards the 4 quarters. And then not only that, we have Utnapishtim, who's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He's the flood hero. And then you get in the Old Testament, you have Noah, who is the flood hero. And so it's quite interesting to see how these things are borrowed or I don't like to say borrowed. I don't believe in cultural appropriation. I think that is the biggest load of fucking horse shit I've ever heard in my life. But I will say this: things are expressed through various lenses, various peoples. Ultimately, we're all one culture, with subcultures, on this earth. So, yeah. So, but it's I would love to. Anybody out there, please, that's thinking about like what to do your PhD in or postdoctoral studies, just do me a favor, do it in ancient Mesopotamian religion. Hit me up. All right. I will do like a mentorship. I'll pay you, and you can just teach me about ancient Mesopotamia.
There's so many good scholars out there on that topic. I feel like they just haven't been drawn into our occult bubbles as much as they could be. For example, in 2019, after a culture, I was in London, I was dragged by Sarah Jane. You know her. So I ran into her on the street outside of Atlantis Books, where I was signing books and giving them to Geraldine to put in her shelves and stock her shelves. Thank you, Geraldine. You're always a legend. I've known her and her daughter since 1997 when I first went there, and I bought the poster that you used to have behind your desk, or you have behind your other desk. in a dusty corner of the old old version of Atlantis books. And she dragged me to this lecture, and it was a PhD who just published his dissertation, and he was looking at a fragment of an Assyrian text in cuneiform that had just been found and attached to this larger tablet, I believe. And it was a section on witchcraft, and it covered why witchcraft was illegal. And witchcraft was illegal because, unlike regular magic, it was done to harm someone. So it's fascinating to see that prescription way back when, that magic was okay unless you're using it to hurt someone. It's almost like we've had this moral prescription against her harming each other for a while or something like that. Who knows? There's a super chat, so I thought I'd put it on screen. And it does lead right into our first segment quite well, but I thought I'd throw the question to you guys, because I can answer it fairly well for Hermetism, but the question isn't about that. The question is, what is the mechanism of salvation in Hermeticism, which is a much broader category, post-Renaissance, and late Platonism, which is the new and up-and-coming term for ancient Neoplatonism, to distinguish it from Renaissance Neoplatonism. So is it just knowledge of the divine, or is there something more? It's a great question, and I will touch on it in my little first opening segment when we get there. So what do you guys think about this? This is a good question. And thank you for the super chats. That's what's going to keep this thing going. Cheers.
Yeah, this is not my particular area of expertise. If you ask me about Gnosticism or something like that, the same question to do with that, I could give you a much more comprehensive answer. So I will derogate to others for this one.
All right, I'll tackle this for late Platonism. I just, I talk so much that I just want to make sure I'm being respectful to everyone else. So, but I will, I've absolutely chomping at the bit for this kind of thing. Is there isn't the same kind of soteriology in late Platonism as there would be in something like early Christianity. It's similar, it's related, but at the end of the day, it's not something that has to do with whether you're going to heaven or hell. It has to do with really primarily an evolution of the soul to the point where you stop reincarnating. There's no more cycles of what they called metempsychosis, right? The transmigration of the soul. And particularly, you get some pretty evocative descriptions of this, though vague, but it maybe impressive would be the right word. In the Phaedo, Plato's Phaedo, when Socrates goes into the afterlife myth. There are many afterlife myths, not just the myth of but this one is really cool because Socrates talks about how they believed, or at least he believed, and obviously Plato, in the fact that, like, you could, depending on your disposition, the way you lived your life, come back as an animal. You can come back as a bee, you can come back as a wolf, so on and so forth. The Greeks are not known for having those beliefs, but this is being talked about as early as 2,500 years ago almost. And he talks about, like, there are two types of people who don't reincarnate, and he basically is the tyrants who effect misery and evil on the greatest demographic scale possible. They don't reincarnate because they go to Tartarus and they're tormented forever. And then philosophers are the next group. He says there are pure souls who live good lives and they get to kind of chill on this ethereal earth plane. It's like the earth above the earth, but they can and do reincarnate when they want. But he says the only other people who don't reincarnate are philosophers, and they dwell among the forms and continually contemplate them. And he makes a point to say, there's not much I can say about that. And then he moves on. So really what we're looking at is really, that does transfer over into late Platonism. They are talking about, it's constantly about, even if it's theurgic, they're talking about contemplation. They're talking about enosis, right? The union of the soul with various divine intermediaries and deities until we finally reach the noetic level. That is hypostatic nous, the mind of God, and we kind of mind meld with God. Now, the thing is, we don't, disintegrate, evaporate, and float into the stratosphere and become stardust. We come right back to where we were because we didn't physically go anywhere in the first place. And we live that out in the world. Now, there's several operative mechanisms, the first being 3 different types of prayer. Now, prayer is going to make us akin to the gods so that we can work with them. And then we get in that work and in that sort of kinship, that relationship that our soul begins to remember that we have with the gods. Their genagogic function begins to cease, meaning the function of the gods that it wants to keep you here relaxes. And there are this midway point called the liberated gods that come and they lift you up to the hypercosmic gods. We know what that word means, the gods that are outside of the cosmos. And a lot of this had to do with theurgic ritual, which rendered you in a state of erotic devotion, and erotic not meaning in any way, shape, or form sexual, as we would understand it, but also the purification. The closer you got to that like the more realized that state became in you, the more purified what they call your okimen pneumatikon, the luminous vehicle or the spiritual vehicle. That became purified and strengthened, and it was ultimately in the strengthening of the pneumatic vehicle, the okima, the vessel, the luminous body, right? Avgoedi soma. It was ultimately in that allowed you to move to that next level, in particularly in late Platonism. So the operative mechanisms are devotion, contemplation to the divine, or contemplation of the divine, which leads to union, and the purification of the spiritual vehicle. Those things were the operative mechanisms in late Platonism. I'm interested to hear if any of that agrees with Hermetism.
Yeah, let's jump into that. It's a good time for our first little segment here. We even have a nice fun little transition video for each one. So I'm going to address the prayer of thanksgiving, which has been placed in different places, usually comes after the discourse, and it's without doubt the primary prayer or final concluding prayer, or doxology as they would be called, at the end of whatever ceremony or worship they would do. And of course there's the famous text at that point in the Hermetica where you have the vowels being vibrated or sung or intoned, and then the magic words said. They're quite interesting words, and I don't want to bungle them, but also moreover I don't want to speak them profanely, so I won't even try to enunciate them here. But you can check them out in the Hermetica or in the Audible audiobook that I did of Hermetica 1 by Dr. Litwa. So there you go. You can check that out. And yeah, we're going to look at do a little mini deep dive into the prayer of thanksgiving. And what I'm inviting all of you, my friends here on screen, and everyone else in the peanut gallery, to think about and contemplate during these most holy and sacred prayers is think about similarity in language to modern prayers, whether it's in a magical tradition that you work in or another religious or spiritual context, and think about that. And I also have a demonstration of the reading of one of the versions. We'll look at 2-3 versions of translations, and I would encourage you to pay attention. If you're on a tiny phone, you might not be able to see all the text, but without further ado, let's jump into our first little official segment. Let's see if this works. Okay, here we go. We render you thanks, most high and potent God, for it is only by your grace that we have come to the light of your knowledge. Oops, wait, that's the wrong button.
That was fun.
Sorry about that. That was fun. Something's not working as planned. Give me a second. Can someone else jibber jabber for a bit while I sort this out? Oh, I think I see what's wrong.
Frater Eleftheria, somebody was asking questions about like what form of Solomonic you recommend or you practice.
Yeah, I saw that before. I think it was about what version of the greater and lesser keys of Solomon I refer to. Off the top of my head, I think it was the Mathers translations. It certainly was the Mathers translation for the lesser key of Solomon. But I think that's a fine translation to use. But one word of caution that I would give with the Mathers translation of the lesser key of Solomon is in the Ars Paulina, which is one of the other books besides the Goetia that people sometimes forget about, which is all about contacting an individual angelic intelligence to help you. Mathers describes that as the holy guardian angel and tries to link it in with some Abramelin stuff and some other things that the Golden Dawn was teaching, but it doesn't appear to be, if you go back and look at earlier versions, it doesn't appear to actually be anything to do with the holy guardian angel. It's more of a zodiacal angel determined according to where the first degree was rising at your time of birth and attributing an angelic name that way. So that would be my word of caution around that. So have I talked for long enough?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, brother. Okay, here we go. Starting our first segment here.
Beautiful.
I'm not sure if that played well. It was choppy for me. That could be the internet or who knows what, but I hope that played for the viewers. Anyway, there's a little transition to start the segment. So the Hermetica ends with a prayer of thanksgiving. And it comes at the end of this very magical component of the Hermetica. And the idea in it is very clearly to acknowledge, well, they believe that this is the only kind of thanksgiving that you can give. The best way to serve God is through giving thanks for existing. So it's a very embodied theology that the early Hermetist community had. And we know that it was a pushback against Greek intellectualism and philosophy to a large extent, even though it was obviously subsuming many of those ideas as well as other Egyptian ideas into its formation. And, it's debated how much of the Hermetic communities in that time period in 3rd century Alexandria and before, how much they were communities. There's people that argue that they weren't at all, and the texts are just scraps, essentially. But Dr. Litwood obviously doesn't agree with that. And even if he did, doesn't change the fact, of course, that what else is the Bible and any other sacred text at this point in our history but scraps of different remaining manuscripts, some complete and unchanged over centuries, and some cobbled together from like the Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi codexes. And yeah, we have what we have. And with the Hermetica in particular, it looks like there was a later illiterate astrologer who went through it and made notes, and then a copyist interpolated those notes into the text. And that's what a lot of scholars have been going through and removing, which of course is going to lead to tremendous growth in Hermetic scholarship, as scholars now have the freedom or license to go through the text and start debating which lines and ideas they think might have been part of this original hypothetical Hermetic community and which ones might not have been. So I want to give you an example of the prayer. This is the prayer from my favorite translation of it. Forgive me, Dr. Litwa, for not using your translation, because my favorite translation is actually by Clement Salomon, and what he's translated as the prayer of thanksgiving is from a different manuscript tradition. It's from the Coptic Nag Hammadi, I believe it's from the Nag Hammadi. I could be wrong. Anyway, either way, it's the version I like. There's some really good qualities about the Copenhaver as well as Litwa's translations. Copenhaver, of course, is the most well-known version of the Hermetica texts, especially if you're not a French speaker, because if you're a French speaker, you would most likely know the Festugier texts. But so here's me reciting the prayer with meaning. Listen to the whole prayer. Afterwards, they would then consume a meal, which has been described as either without the flesh of living things, without the flesh of animals, or without consuming any living thing. Either way, it's clear that it was probably some bread or something similar to that. Not really too much of a shock, since the Hermetic community was aware of Christians. They interacted with Christians and with Jews and with many other kinds of pagans, because the Hermetists were pagans, unlike the Hermeticists of the Renaissance, who were distinctly Christians reforming themselves through their knowledge of the Hermetica, which was made possible by the Ficino translation, the Catholic priest Marsilio Ficino, and of course Ludovico Lazzarelli, who was the first person ever in history to call himself a Hermetist and a Christian. And let's not forget that due to Dr. Sledge's on Esoterica's fabulous Agrippa course, we have a new understanding of Agrippa in context. And during the Italian Renaissance, Agrippa was even in Italy, and in series of public lectures stated that he felt that Hermetic Christianity was the true and ultimate form of Christianity. And they didn't kill him for that. So it does tell you something, as Dr. Sledge has said, about the culture of the time. If he was able to make these kinds of claims, clearly he was in a hospitable environment for that to be considered, even in Italy, the home of Roman Catholicism. So think of this prayer as a prayer you'd say before having your bread and wine, or your I don't know what else you would eat that they might have. I wish I knew more about 3rd century Egyptian Alexandrian cuisine, but I do not. And so they would say this prayer at the end of their ritual, after they had very likely had an ecstatic experience through the procedure of singing and magic words. So hopefully this plays clearly and well for you. If it doesn't, blame Canadian internet, but hopefully it works all right. We render you thanks, most high and potent God, for it is only by your grace that we have come to the light of your knowledge. Holy and reverend is your name, the one name by which God alone is to be praised.
Did it cut out?
I haven't seen StreamYard malfunction in that way before, so that might be just what's happening. That is very odd. I can play it through another means. There's a, always, let me just try playing it this way. This should work. Yeah. All right.
It'd be really funny if it'd be really, really funny if I don't know, some like the rapper Mystical, if that video that's just a rap video just started playing instead of the prayer you have queued up. I think that'd be,
I know
we could do
That'd be great.
See, I shared it, but it's just not going. Could just be being slow.
While you work on that, this person's asking. Okay, good.
Yeah, go ahead.
They're asking me, how do I see the difference between Plato and Pythagoras? Well, I guess I would say my rudimentary understanding is that maybe Pythagoras would be more oriented towards finding divine in numerology or mathematics, and maybe Plato would be more oriented towards ascending to the good or focused on the good or something. But kind of outside my wheelhouse. I would probably redirect that question to Ike because this is his area of expertise. Do you think I'm off on that, or what do you think?
Well, the interesting thing is that the earliest fragments, the ones that come from, I think, like Philolaos and a few of those guys, they would have been living like during the time of Pythagoras, and they didn't really write anything about math, which is interesting. They were much more concerned with a rule, almost like a holy order, a rule of living, and sort of the politiki, you know, the group or communal politics. Now you get into Neo-Pythagoreanism in the first few centuries of the Common Era. It's a different story. I personally happen to think that regardless of whether or not we have historical evidence for how interested in mathematics Pythagoras and his community, you know, were or weren't, I think that absolutely that they were. You're definitely onto something there. I think that the heart of the cult was a number mysticism, but the thing is, they were prohibited from talking about it. Right. So, of course, you know, like those guys that would have lived in that very strict, you know, rule of life where they were really, really obligated to secrecy. I think that they wouldn't have written about it. So that makes sense. I think, you know, Plato, obviously, he was also interested in politics. It can be said that the entire Platonic oeuvre is centered around creating the ideal political situation, because he lived in the time of the 40 tyrants, where they were doing like Gestapo style, pulling people out of their fucking homes and killing them at night. You know, and many of them were his relatives. Like the people in power were Plato's relatives. And he said, I'm very, very primed for politics, but I walked away and I chose the life of philosophy. I could have easily gotten into that. And it's, you know, you read like his seventh letter, which is arguably the only one that most scholars agree is authentic. And it talks about, it's strictly political, because he's talking about the time that he was called forth to go and deal with the prince, now king, Dionysus in Sicily. He had just inherited his father's kingdom, and he's like, okay, here's a chance for you to the guy's Prince Dionysus's uncle got Plato involved, and he said, listen, this is your chance to install a philosopher king, that whole project of yours. So long story short, he gets locked in a tower for a couple of years, and they have to send a whole envoy across the sea to go and get him. But I would say, yeah, Plato does talk about math a lot. And the thing is, the one thing about Plato, and I'll end here, and I'll say that really Platonism is a continuation and an elaboration of Pythagoreanism. That's why Neoplatonism or late Platonism and Neo-Pythagoreanism, they coexisted so perfectly in people like Proclus and Iamblichus. They coexisted perfectly in that time. But Plato, what a lot of people don't realize is that Plato not only had a hidden metric system or metric layout format for his dialogues that resembled music of that time, but he also encoded specific geometry into that you wouldn't know unless you read it and like sort of drew out what he was saying in things like the divided line and the cosmogony of the Timaeus and the Meno, you know, so there's a lot there, I would say. And the main thing is that we just have way more of Plato, right? Pythagoras, they say he didn't write anything. Some people say he did. We don't have anything he wrote. So you know, who knows? That's a lot of words to really say nothing, but hey, it was fun.
Just, and you know, remember, according to Epstein, Plato didn't write anything, so who knows?
I mean, we should rely on Epstein.
Oh yeah, he's a reliable source.
Super solid.
Super solid. This is a great question, and I will be able to answer it in our segment we're doing right now. So yeah, keep that question. The idea that you don't gain knowledge, that you reconnect to something already there. What does this kind of realization have in Gnostics, Hermeticists? I will answer it for the Hermetists. And if you want to remove the comment from the screen, I will play this clip. Can you find it?
I'm an amateur over here working on it. Let's see.
You're the real deal,
Yeah.
Sky. You're a pro.
We're trying
Thanks,
to get
man.
a little production value for you folks, and so I hope you appreciate it.
You
Yeah,
just have to find the comment, and then if I click back on it,
I dressed up.
This-
How's that for
here, I got
production
it.
value?
I think I got
Sweet.
it. There we go.
I know you had your robe on and everything.
Thank you all for all of your contributions to our channels. Thank you. Here we go. The prayer of thanksgiving of the ancient Hermetists.
This is what they call in college radio dead
The
air.
one name by which God alone is to be praised, according to the religion of our fathers. We do indeed thank you, since you deign to give all beings your paternal care, your religion, and your love, and even sweeter. Upon us you have bestowed these powers, perception, reason, and intelligence. Perception that we may recognize you, reason that we may follow up our intuition, and knowledge that in knowing you we may find joy. Having been saved by your divine power, we rejoice because you have shown yourself to us in your totality. We rejoice because while we are still in these bodies, you deign to consecrate us for eternity. This is the only way human beings have of giving thanks, to acknowledge your majesty. We have known you and the supreme light by conscious intelligence alone. We understand you. O true life of life, O fertile womb of all that has come into being. O eternal steadfastness, we have known you in your conception of the whole of abundant nature, in every prayer through which we reverence the good of all good. We plead only for this, that you may wish us to continue to serve you in the love of your knowledge, and that we may never be separated from this kind of life.
Glorious. Well done, sir.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll golf clap for
So,
that.
all right. So that is the translation from Clement Solomon. And that's from this very small text on the Asclepius. It's an alternate manuscript tradition of the Asclepius. And so what I'm going to put on the screen now for you guys is Dr. Litwa's translation. And so if you can remember something of what we just heard and look at this text, you might notice some key differences. Well, yeah, they're not necessarily going to be the most drastic differences, but a few of them are. A few of them are, and it should allow us a good chance to also address that question that was so kindly super chatted to us. So putting this on the screen. Yeah, we just got to be patient with the good old Canadian internet. There we go, the prayer of thanksgiving. So this is the prayer that they prayed. We thank you, every soul and heart stretches toward you, O name unoffended, to be honored with the designation God, and blessed by the designation Father. The Father's goodwill, truth, and love extends unto all people and unto the universe. And if there is a sweet and simple teaching, may it bestow on us nous, logos, and gnosis. Nous, that we may noetize you, logos, that we may interpret you, and gnosis, that we may know you. We rejoice when we receive light in your gnosis. We rejoice since you have taught us. We rejoice since while in a body you have made us gods by gnosis. That's sort of an answer to your question there. The thanksgiving of humans stretching toward you is one thing, that we know you. We have known you, O noetic light, O life of life. Oh, we have known you, O womb of all nature. We have known you. O womb that conceives by the Father's penis. We have known you. O eternal consistency of the Father who so richly begets. We worship your goodness. One single wish we request. We wish that you keep us in gnosis. One protection we wish, that we may not slip from a life such as this. And so before we get into a conversation about this and maybe get some questions and super chats, so the things that struck me most, and have, because I don't use this prayer in my own personal work, despite it being a great version of it. And the main reason is actually kind of small. I get shaken out of the spiritual state by the appearance of the word penis. And that's a personal thing maybe, but it just sort of jars me. And it's quite clear from talking with Dr. Litwa, like there's an either or. The idea is is of a divine being's creative organ, and so it could go either way. And the Hermetic also makes it very clear that God is not a male or female, that God is an androgynous male and female force. So that's very clear. But the Hermetica also affirms what you were saying, Ike, about erotic love. Like, it's not platonic love that we have for God, it's erotic love, it's eros, right? So it's the same love for God that we need to have, that we have for creating new life and making new children and new human beings. So that is, you mentioned that it's not about sex. Well, for the Hermetists, it was kind of about sex, because they were called to have kids, be fruitful and multiply, if you like. But the salvation that we see is very interesting. And I like that the commenter used the word realizations, because the reason I ended up following the Hermetic path my entire life up till this point, since early teens, since 14, 15, was because I was having these experiences. They would happen throughout my daily life. They'd come out of the blue, but they'd also come from contemplation and often silence, walking alone, meditating in the woods, just going for a walk, or even coming home from the store late at night and seeing the stars, what you could see of them through the clouds of North Vancouver. And I would have these moments where all of a sudden it felt like I wasn't myself. I was something else. I was connected to something higher. I'm betting everyone in the chat here knows exactly what I'm talking about. But that feeling of something above you transmitting to you, or you just connecting with it and just having what I would call realizations. That's what I called them in my young 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old brain. I called them realizations, and I numbered them in my diary. Of course I did, right? Because they were so profound. I would write them down, and I'd want to keep track of them and be like, damn, maybe the universe is actually going to teach me something that's real as I grow up into this strange world I find myself in. So for me, that's what that experience was. And the reason I became, a lover of the Way of Hermes is because when I read the Hermetica, or the Pymander in particular, because that was the first text I really had access to in this little beautiful hardcover by the Yogi Publication Societies, that was what they were talking about. Is a lot of it was confusing in those days, but there was this clear idea that through dialogue or relationship and just openness to divine, to what is beyond nature but still in nature, we would open ourselves to a higher knowledge. And that's what it felt very much like was always coming through, was this higher knowledge. And so that is what I called them realizations. And in the Hermetica, it's considered to be, that's what's achieved through Hermetic initiation, through wondering at what's beyond, being guided, doing these practices of sound and prayer. You access your nous, which is a holy daimon. It is a daimon. It's considered a spirit. So that which is your intuition also connects to your daimon. And the daimon in the Hermetica, for those who might not know in the chat, is a god. It is like a god. It is a god. It is in some ways better than a god. It's also like an angel. It is mainly a daimon, and it is your higher self. It is. And if you successfully initiate into the way of that the way of Hermes. Your soul, when you die, unites with that higher self in a sense. You get this tunic of fire or body of light, and you go off and become like the star gods and angels. But any communication, any gnosis in the sense of higher consciousness, in the Hermetica itself, it says you can, through that gnosis and nous, know anything and be anywhere. It's quite explicit, which should make a lot of modern magicians really happy, because, you know, we often struggle to define the parameters of what we think is possible on our spiritual or magical paths. Well, the Hermetists are very optimistic in every way most of the time, and as far as they're concerned, through your nous and through the gnosis of the given by God through your holy daimon, you can know anything and be anywhere. So that's my spiel on that, and therefore we give thanks.
I want to talk about that penis real quick.
I knew you would, brother.
I do. Well, it's just interesting because that you use the word transmission, and that's effectively what that is alluding to, is the movement. This is the first, particularly in something like Platonism, Neoplatonism. This is the first movement away from the absolute, which, as you aptly put, contains both of those. It is androgynous, right? Andros, gynos. It has both. It's not neither. It has both. And then the first transmission is a movement away from that stillness that we call prodos, right? Emanation. And then you get that in the Platonic thing, and we're talking about what receives that emanation is psyche. But more importantly, not just any soul, psyche cosmou, the soul of the world soul receives the noetic projection from the absolute. And there it says, who fertilizes the womb of nature with thy penis. It is the mind impregnating the soul of the world with harmony, ratio, proportion that allows it to seem autonomous. Like God's hand doesn't have to come through the cloud and make up and pull a plant up by the shoot, because it appears that this is autonomous because he has projected his mind into it. Now, in the coffin texts, you get this version of it in something that is purely Egyptian, which is fantastic. You get Atum, and he rises out of the primordial waters of Nut or Nun, and as an egg, and that egg hatches, and then Atum comes out as a bird. And what's the first thing he does? Like any young man, he immediately ejaculates. And from that ejaculant, he births the two powers of Tefnut and Shu, air and fire. But what he says shortly after that is, when I was alone, inert, they were already with me. So there again, he's talking about, even when I was one, those two, what I created were inside of me. So again, there's that androgynous nature of the first creator. And I just thought that it's so beautiful to see something like that just carried, from the coffin text to the prayer of thanksgiving. That has been a through line in this kind of religio-philosophical thought that has continually attracted me to it, is that it has fucking stayed in place. You just have to be able to see it when they're talking about it, and that's one of the things that I try to encourage people to do. Like I was saying before, is like see the commonality. They're talking about the exact same thing over thousands of years. That's enough dick talk for me. Sorry.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
I want to ask what are the differences between Litwa's translation and some of the other translations, and how does his translation lend to a more accurate understanding in your estimation? Like, what are some of the details about that?
He uses the technical terms. Noetic, noet, and noetize, which would be, that's a creative choice from him, but very true to the text, you could say. excuse me. So noetize, and he says, so when the Solomon translation says talks about the three faculties, right? It says perception, reason, and intelligence, whereas Litwa doesn't say intelligence, says gnosis. Reason, I think, is no, perception is noetica, from nous, I believe, and reason. What does he say? What's he say there? It's such a short prayer, and the core text, the core manuscript text of the Hermetic is shorter. Nous, logos, and gnosis. Yeah, so yeah, nous, that we may noetize you, whereas the other translations, use more common words. Now he uses common verbiage so much in his translation. I think there in that prayer he wanted to cast the speaker's mind to the technicalities and the rich denseness of those words and all of their semiotic meaning entangled within it, the history as well. Whereas in the Clement Solomon translation, clearly he's going for communicating clarity to the reader, hence the words perception and reason. But other than that, I mean, there's not vast differences between the translations. We could look at the Copenhagen translation here, and it's from the same manuscript as the Litwa. And what Copenhagen goes with is, and it's interesting, Copenhagen translates quite differently. Litwa also edited out sentences and words where he felt they were interpolated, following the new Christian Wildberg method that's going to be coming out at some point in the next million years. Of course, Wildberg doesn't believe there was a community or anything like that. So by giving us the gift, so here it's like, we thank you. This is the Copenhagen. We thank you, Supreme and Most High God, by whose grace alone we have attained the light of your knowledge. That's similar. Holy name that must be honored, the one name by which our ancestral faith blesses God alone. We thank you who deign to grant to all the Father's fidelity. See, there you have a real lack of clarity in that line. And that's fine. It's probably more literal, but that's where the Clement Solomon and Litwa are a bit clearer. So they definitely, Litwa always errs on the side of clarity, praise be, whereas the original Copenhagen can struggle for precision, and with literal translations you can often lose clarity. Reverence and love, so Father's fidelity, reverence, and love, along with any power that is sweeter, by giving us the gift of consciousness, reason, and understanding. So again, general terms so that we can understand them. Consciousness, by which we may know you. Reason, by which we may see you in our dim suppositions. And knowledge, by which we may rejoice in knowing you. And so that's interesting. And I definitely encourage people to do a dive into that. I might do a whole video comparison myself at some point that dives into the detailed analysis. I certainly would love to analyze it just from a text critical position, like I would any poem, and then look into the theology of the prayer as I would look into any modern prayer as well. So use those sort of modern methods of text criticism. That could be a fun video that obviously I kind of am already preparing for by doing this. But what's exciting about today is to get to share this prayer, which I use with my students so frequently and love so much, and share it with you guys and see what you guys think. The thing that strikes me is, like, you must have noticed, like, the prayers for the elementals that we get from Aleph Alevi, and which have earlier antecedents, the phraseology is very similar. It's similar to Christian phraseology, right? True life of life, or life from life, Deum de Deo, Lumen de Lumine. This whole language is common to, I think, that time in history, and it's just been so beautiful that we carried it forward. But I'm not sure about any more details than that when it comes to the language decisions that were made. Yeah. Okay, we can go before we move on to the next segment. If you guys have any questions or thoughts about what we've just read, or thoughts about this sort of the Hermetic idea. Yeah, there was one that we can talk about. Okay, here's a comment. Frater RC, can you clarify if you know how the Sufis and RC wove together? What do you mean by RC? Do you mean Rosicrucians?
You,
I don't know.
how did you get woven together with
How do
Sufis?
I tie it?
Did Sufis
I
taught
don't
you
know.
how to
I did
weave?
have
He's
I
a
asked because it
spinster.
appears that you and I belong to the HOGD. Yeah, so I've had Sufi friends growing up in Waldorf school and watched them dervish dance and all that. I don't know much about Sufism, though I've read lots of Rumi. Who hasn't read lots of Rumi? And by RC, I assume you mean R plus C, which is the usual abbreviation for Rosicrucian or Rose and Cross. I don't know, and if that's what you do mean, I have no knowledge of any crossover between the Sufis and the Rosicrucians, other than the fact that lots of Rosicrucians and Western mystics in general have been pulling in from Rumi's poems ever since they were discovered in the West. They've been very popular. I'm not sure when they were discovered. There's also a question about Hermetic orders from the same person, I believe. Yeah, Hermetic orders other than the Golden Dawn and the other famous ones, like, I'm not aware of too many other than the ones I belong to or have been trained in. So, yeah, but definitely reach out to me directly if you want to get into the weeds of any of that sort of stuff. Happy to help you. I always love helping people bushwhack their way through the modern culture to find groups that are going to work for them or whatever. That's kind of what I do professionally, is help people find their way. And once they find it, sometimes I help them follow it if it's a path I'm able to lead you on. So, super chat: how to avoid feeling drained after ecstatic visionary experiences? More grounding, more middle pillar work, both probably. Yeah, let's throw this to my teammates here.
Have a big meal and maybe have a cup of tea. Just all natural ways to replenish the energy that you've lost. But it does, if you've had an intense visionary experience or something, it does leave you drained. That's part of the reason why it's worked.
What do you think, Ike?
I love that.
Yeah, I read that a lot early in my Golden Dawn training. Any effective any effective magical work should render the practitioner in a state of fatigue and being drained. Now, sure, Western magic, absolutely, but also being trained at the same time in Taoist inner alchemy through school and through private instruction, you're taught methods to not use your own energy, but to open up certain ways to use serve as almost like a transformer or a conduit for universal energy. But the thing is, you can't just do that. But you're right. Your spiritual vehicle. You could call it your etheric body, right? I wrote the book, Etheric Magic. Go out and buy it. That has to be ready to hold more amplitude, higher volume of that energy without making you psychotic, because it's just going to fuel what's already there, right? So if you've got issues, particularly with lust, with appetite, this continual kind of work of drawing more power into your battery is going to exacerbate those things until you get a handle on it. So part of it, as I mentioned before, in the Neoplatonic sense, is you got to get this right, and in the meantime, also train your etheric vehicle to be able to hold more of that universal energy. And one of the ways we do that in the Golden Dawn is, as you mentioned, the middle pillar is a good way to begin to slowly siphon more and more amplitude. And you are technically in that exercise drawing down what we would call the Shefa, right? The undifferentiated white scintillating light of the Creator. That's my take on it. But the Taoist internal alchemist, really, I learned it from Qigong. Qigong has a methodology for or techniques for avoiding that drainage by, rather than exhausting yourself, your microcosm, to just render yourself completely latent, and open up and transmit higher energy. And I write a little bit about that in the book. Reiki practitioners of any real stripes will be able to do that, because otherwise it's etheric vampirism. You're sitting here, yes, I'm healing somebody, but they're taking all my energy, which can make me sick. So you learn these ways of becoming a conduit. Now, the thing is, it's really hard for modern Western people to do this because you must do nothing. I can't tell you how many times I've had people in Qigong healing, Reiki therapy go, I am sending you the white light. I'm giving you thoughts. It's like, no, shut up. Shut the fuck up. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Tune yourself in, open, receive, and transmit. That's all. Get your ego out of it about how, rosy and healing. Nobody gives a shit, and you're not doing it effectively. So it's one of these things where it's not meant for you to feel special, but you're improving. This is part of the evolution of your soul. We could say this is a divinizing trait to be able to cultivate that state of empty fullness and transmit that. So that's kind of my take on it, given what I know about Qigong. I agree entirely, though, with Frater Eleftheria, because you're not going to, no matter how long you do this, you're not going to feel like you can then go and go to the gym after you do. So, it's like there will be a little bit of drainage, and just to get your head back in the game, to reorient your soul towards okay, chop wood, carry water type of thing. I have to take care of my mundane affairs. Eating a big meal is very good. And certain types of foods, like things that grow underground, things that are very dense, potatoes, things like that. Nuts are really good if you want to ground. Sometimes dark chocolate.
Take a nap, maybe.
Could do that. You might have weird dreams. What do you think, Frater RC? You do work like this.
Yeah. I like to go for a walk on the beach, sit by the water. If I'm too wiped out from the work I'm doing, honestly, sometimes you want to stay in that state, especially if you're diarizing and writing about it a lot. Sometimes you just keep doing work, honestly. Sometimes you just keep doing magical work. You're like, oh, well, I'm already in an altered state and dealing with so much. Maybe I'll just keep going for a while. I've done that a lot in my life, where I was not messed up, but so affected by what I had done that it's like, yeah, let's turn it into an all day or an all nighter. We used to do a lot of crazy stuff like that, because I'm not actively in a Golden Dawn order, and haven't been for a long time, but my training was very intense and very full time, especially since I was so young. I had lots of time to do that kind of crazy stuff that you read about often in books. But as I'm older, if I do something that's very spiritually taking me out of myself and ungrounding, shall we say, I mean, honestly, it's so simple. It's the chop wood, carry water, because I don't know about you, but I don't have a maid, and someone's got to cook and clean and take out the garbage, and going for a walk is usually just my reward for taking out the garbage, right? It's I got to take out recycling and then go to the store and do shopping. Mundane stuff is good. Or here's a really good one that you might actually be able to try, is call a friend you haven't called in a while and have a nice talk with them when you're in that state. Not to tell them about what you've done, to listen to them and hear how they're doing. Take that state and turn it into a blessing of abundance, of attention, compassion, and empathy towards someone else who you might know needs to hear from you or would just be surprised by your call. That's a really lovely way, I think, to translate that energy if you have it in you after a major working. But often, just chilling out, watching something funny, talking with a friend, having a meal, doing some chores. Doing some chores is good. Shall we move on to Frater Eleftheria's first segment? Are you up for it, Frater?
Yeah, okay, let's go.
All right.
Sure.
So we talked a lot about this, people, and one bit of housekeeping. So it looks like if we comment, it comments on all our channels. So I asked that lady what word she was wondering how it's spelt, Miss the Elixir, and it posted it to all our channels. So let's be aware that if we do a comment, it looks to everyone in our audience is like we're the ones commenting, even though it's probably just one of us. So maybe we can tweak that. I don't know. Yeah, the word's lost. Okay, mom duties. There you go. You're grounding down. Mom duties is also, I think, a powerful way to have a spiritual experience, though, because what more selfless act is there than helping nourish the life of another and the soul and nous? Remember, think about this. You're not taking care of a kid. You're taking care of a daimon that's connected to this earth body which is full of other daimons and even kakodaimones, according to the Hermetica. And, you want to help guide it along the path of its soul so that it unites with its higher more rather than gets dragged down in the dirt and uncleanliness of creation, which is not evil. It's kind of called evil sometimes, but it's still part of God and therefore ultimately beautiful. And that's the difference between Hermetic thought and some other versions of Gnostic thought. And just for a bit of humor before we lead into our beautiful fellow Aquarian Frater Eleftheria's segment. Yeah, I just found out Eleftheria is born the third day before me, the 30th. We don't know what year, but that's just super cool that you're born the day before me. My little sister's born the day after me.
Carbon date him.
Poor brother.
Carbon date him.
It doesn't matter if he's older or younger. All that matters is he's got better hair. All right, let's see if I can play this intro clip for your segment. And yeah, so like I was saying, everybody, I'm taking sort of lead on this episode. Hopefully someone else will be front man next time. But it's always an honor and a pleasure with these gentlemen. And so I made these cool little intro videos to each segment. Hopefully they play well for you. They sort of seem to skip on our end. And we decided not to go too structured. We're just wanting to bring themes to you guys so that we can have a little bit of structure, a little bit of Boaz in your life. And your topic is, here we go. Wait for it.
Yes, very, very cool intro. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the Pistis Sophia a bit today. So sorry, Google. Sorry to everybody here who is hoping to be picked up by the Google algorithm, but I'm going to be mentioning Jesus a lot. And that's because the Pistis Sophia, for those who might not know, is a Gnostic text. So it gives a kind of alternative form of Christianity to what we might be familiar with from the canonical Gospels. And it's regarded as the secret teachings of Jesus. The esoteric teachings of Jesus, salvation through ascent as a spiritual being to become like a heavenly being and gain gnosis or self-knowledge. To do that rather than the vicarious atonement that we're familiar with of Christ came and died for your sins and you have to just believe in him, and that's how salvation works. So we're talking about the Pistis Sophia, 3rd century AD text unearthed in the 1700s. And one thing that I wanted to touch on, first of all, is the idea that there is this idea from some people that Gnosticism is a more genuine form of Christianity, a more authentic form than perhaps the orthodoxy of the canonical Gospels. And the answer is yes and no. I think the big weakness that Gnosticism has is that the Gnostic Gospels and a lot of the Gnostic texts came 200 to 300 years after the canonical Gospels were written. So in terms of closeness in time, the canonical Gospels have got that going for them. And it does seem that some other ideas have been introduced into Gnosticism that perhaps weren't there in early Christianity. I'll get into that in a moment as well. But I think that in spite of the age of the Gnostic texts, there does seem to have been an esoteric tradition in Christianity that goes all the way back to it's very similar time to the early Pauline Christianity, or when the Gospels, 4 canonical Gospels were written, because you've got the Gospel of Thomas, where there is this kind of Thomasine tradition. Some people say it's Gnostic, it's more pre-Gnostic, but this idea of looking within and ascending to become like Jesus and all of this similar themes to later Gnosticism. And the dating of that, according to some people, is quite close in time to the canonical Gospels. And there seems to be a bit of a debate between the Gospels of John and Thomas that are happening. So that's interesting. So yeah, potentially this is a very old branch of Christianity, but it's very interesting. It's got a lot of themes that are similar to the Hermetic or Hermetist themes that we were talking about before. You know, spiritualizing the human being, ascending through the different aeons, and gaining a garment of light, which is very similar terminology to the tunic of fire in the Corpus Hermeticum. And I think that there's a lot going on in Alexandria in like the first few centuries of the Common Era, where the Corpus Hermeticum and like some of the early Hermetists or traditions came from, and then the Gnostic as well. There seems to be this divergence from what's going on in Alexandria and the esoteric schools that were happening there. And as we'll see, I think that some of the stuff that made its way into at least the Pista Sophia seems to go all the way back to like ancient Egypt. So in terms of the Pista Sophia itself, it's basically the story of Jesus after the resurrection. He's said to have been around for 11 years after that, and then he gives this secret teaching to some of his disciples in the narrative of the Pista Sophia. So we see a story whereby Jesus takes on the form of a being of light and kind of has this initiation where he ascends to heaven and receives the vestment of light, and then journeys through the heavens, encounters a being called Sophia, who is the female embodiment of wisdom, and really the female counterpart to the cosmic Christ. And he sees her repenting and helps her to get back up to the light, because of course Sophia in the Gnostic myth, in this Pista Sophia, was the spirit of wisdom. She sought the light of lights that is above her. She's sort of residing in the 13th aeon. She wants to follow the higher light, is deceived by a false light of the demiurge, and is cast down, falls through the lower 12 aeons, controlled by the archons, these kind of oppressive angels that are keeping people trapped in matter, and she falls down into chaos. And so Jesus, when he gives the teachings that he received by traveling through these heavenly realms himself, when he gives those to his disciples, in the narrative of the Pista Sophia, he describes how Sophia needs to reascend through those aeons to reach the 13th aeon again. And so there is a series of repentances that she has to go through in order to do that. And so the teachings of the Pista Sophia are the teachings of these 12 repentances. And the format that the book goes through is like Jesus will ask one of his disciples to summarize one of the repentances after having heard the repentance, and then this particular disciple will relate it to one of the Psalms. And so what we see there is with each of these 13 repentances, there's a corresponding Psalm, and there's also a corresponding disciple. And by looking at those things, you can start to see the theme of each repentance. And really, what starts to emerge is it's basically describing the step by step the process of repentance. This is what I've come to believe anyway, by studying the text, rather than like this is a repentance for lust, or this is a repentance for greed. It's really like you've got the stages of grieving. It's like different stages of realizing you're screwed, that you're in a fallen state and you want to get back to the light, and an intensification of that. So that's really what's happening in the 13 repentances. And so, and what Sophia really is a metaphor for the human soul. And so we each have to go through the same process of repentance as a thing that we give up, our old way, the things holding us down. But we also need to combine that with, in order to achieve the salvation that Jesus is describing in this text, we also need to receive what are called the three baptisms, one of fire, one of water, and one of spirit. And then we also need to receive a bunch of other mysteries, which Jesus says refer to the first and second books of Jehu. So these are basically a bunch of magical incantations for gaining passage through the different aeons, to get to the pleroma, which lies above them. And so all of these things together, the baptisms, the incantations, and the repentances, is the path back. And so, yeah, for those who might not be familiar with the Gnostic cosmology, you've got the highest heaven where God, capital G, dwells, and then you've got the demiurge, who's like the counterfeit God who created the physical universe and wants to keep souls trapped there. And then you've got the aeons below that, which are usually divided according to the 7 classical planets, or they're divided according to the 12 signs of the zodiac, but they basically represent the forces of fate, and the forces of the universe that are conditioning our soul and holding it down and making it heavy. And so, yeah, and so Jesus in the Pistis Sophia kind of ascends, and he creates the path back, and gives us these teachings to show us the path back, to show the soul the path back. And each of these aeons is ruled by an oppressive angel known as an archon that dwells in that particular aeon. And they're the ones we bypass to reach the pleroma again. So that's pretty much the Pistis Sophia in a nutshell. And there's some other things as well about chastisements of the soul in the chaos, which is like the lowest underworld below the aeons, which is where Sophia ends up at first. But one thing that's interesting about the chaos, about this underworld realm, that I just wanted to touch on, is that it's described as Amenti, which of course is the Egyptian name for the underworld. And so a couple of the features of the system that's put forward in this Pistis Sophia, you've got a combination of Amenti and trying to get out of Amenti or navigate your way through this other world beyond. And then you've got using incantations and things like that in order to do that. Sounds very similar to ancient Egyptian mystery religions. If you think about the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, it's a very similar kind of procedure that's laid out in that book. So yeah, I might just leave it there. That's my summary of the Pistis Sophia, and yeah, I just think it's a really interesting text because it's to a lot of seemingly Egyptian stuff and similarities perhaps with the Hermetic or Hermetist way of ascent as well. So I might just open it up for discussion now.
Well, I mean, oh yeah, sorry, Sky, you go first.
Okay. I don't remember one question is I don't remember the particular sect of Gnostics that the Pistis Sophia is central to. So that's one question. But then the other is, are there any astrological elaborations in any of these traditions? Because I remember this part of the Pistis Sophia where it was talking about like the loosening of the bonds of the existing order and the stars and the planets and something. And I don't know if it was saying it was like on a full moon in the month of Taibi, a star came from behind the sun, heaven got agitated, and I think it was talking about like the descent of Christ or something like that. And I don't know if it was saying all 13 aeons or what, but it was talking about the loosening of their ability to influence the earth and be confounded in confusion. Like you mix them all up for the salvation of all souls. Because it seems like basically if if not, like the Archons would just have continued to harvest our loosh or something like that eternally. But so yeah, I'm doing a terrible job of describing it because it's so elaborate and specific. But I was wondering if this like had any integration in astrological theories, or how it shaped their understanding with like the state of the planets and the stars before they were all like thrown into this new state of loosening the bonds.
Well, in terms of the Pistis Sophia, there's no kind of overt like this is Aquarius, this is Cancer, this is whatever in there, but the number 12 kind of alludes to the fact that this is zodiac, that these are the fixed stars that are kind of watching over us. In terms of the way that we interact with these archons in the Pistis Sophia system through the path of ascent, it's what the narrative describes is like Jesus taking on this form of light, and then pretty much humbling the archons, like standing up to them and humbling them, and then making that pathway. And then in terms of other people becoming beings of light and ascending back up, it's really about flying under the archons' radars. That's the sort of language, not that specific language, obviously, but like that's the kind of way that the Gnostics often talk about this is if you become a being of light, the archons won't notice you, and you can kind of slip past them more easily to make it back up to the pleroma. So, yeah, hopefully that's answered some of your questions.
Thank you.
Guy, you asked the same question I wanted to ask, so I found another one in Eleftheria in your answer, or a comment, which is interesting. That I first was told to read the Pistis Sophia, I think, when I was in like Practicus. You know, when you get into some of the devout literature in that grade, often I think we do that in a lot of orders, right? It's a devout grade with the water element and the Saint John, and yeah. Anyway, so I was reading Pistis Sophia from that through Portal, but then I sort of put it down because the Gnostic aspect of the archons and the challenges and the trials were didn't really ring a bell or resonate with me as much as the Hermetic idea, which is just so similar. And that's actually what I want to focus on, is they're so similar it seems like in Gnosticisms, Christian Gnosticisms, the idea is that the archons are at one extreme perhaps just outright evil and nasty, but at another end they're there to challenge you. And in the Hermetic tradition, they're seen even more positively. Surprise, surprise, the ultimate, you know, optimists of the ancient world, the Hermetists. And they're basically an interfaith community, it seems like, for lack of a better phrase in modern parlance. It seems like they were an interfaith community because they had no problem with Jesus being a god or a savior. That was not controversial at all, and they didn't see any reason why he wouldn't be. Zosimos said, yeah, it sounds like Jesus, of course Jesus is a savior, is a god. And they're like, well, so you believe he's the god? They would be like, what do you mean the god? Right? You mean the monad? I mean, come on. Yeah. But so the idea in the Hermetica is just that they're there to help you. They're actually there to help you, the archons. So that is very positive. But yeah, that's the major difference. But the similarities, there's way more similarities than there are differences, is my point. And thanks, that was a great little synopsis presentation. That was really nice to dive back into the world of the Pistis Sophia. And there's tons of questions we have, so.
Ike, do you want to have any comments on that before we open up some questions?
Well, it's just going to dovetail so perfectly into what I've kind of loosely prepared for tonight. It really is explaining in Frater Eleftheria's very clear, lucid, and gentle way, actually, is which is one of the things I love the most about you, is your presentation style. He's introducing some complex stuff. And what I also really like about the way that you introduce it is that you introduce it at a level of depth where people can, like, okay, I can swim in this, because this stuff can get out of hand really quickly. People can find themselves out of their depth. So I just think that that's a great job, and there's so much there. The thing that I would point out first is obviously Sophia is, yes, obviously that name means wisdom in Greek, but she's the paradigm of the soul, because the descent and then re-ascent is exactly, it's a story. That story in particular is paradigmatic of what in Hermetic traditions, in Neoplatonic traditions, in the theurgic tradition, that's exactly what we're doing. And I'm going to point to things like Discourse on the 8th and the 9th tonight from Nag Hammadi, and Corpus Hermeticum 13, Corpus Hermeticum 14. I'm going to be pointing at some of that stuff to show, and of course, on What Is Up to Us by Porphyry, to show how that system is mirrored exactly. But the rationale given is it's the same thing, but it's put more philosophically than it is like religio mythopoetically in the Pistis Sophia. So I think it's going to be great just to kind of springboard off of your delivery there.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
One more thought before we go through some of the questions from people. In discussing the way it does, the Sophia being, and in other pseudepigrapha being present everywhere, or present and open to everyone, I wonder how much of that is meant to be a subversion or an explanation of what happened to the Shekinah after the Second Temple destruction, right? Because if the Shekinah, I think, is generally seen in Judaism as being contained within the temple, and then the temple's destroyed in 70 CE AD for you hardcore Christian traditionalists out there. And then where's the Shekinah after the temple's gone? And then it reappears, of course, in the Hagia Sophia, famously. Hagia Sophia for some of you people, if you're trying to spell it. Hagia Sophia, right? And then famously, of course, when the Ottomans, when they took over Istanbul or Constantinople and took it over, many people are claimed to have seen this blue light leaving the top of the Hagia Sophia. And I think there's even reports of like strange electricity and stuff, but obviously stories get embellished. But that's an interesting one to me. The idea that the Sophia or the Shekinah, same or different, who knows, has a place where it resides versus no place, or has many places perhaps that it is condensed and contained. I mean, we all love the idea of ley lines, I'm sure, and the other idea of other sacred spots. I mean, Christians have been building their sacred spots over older sacred spots, which are built over older sacred spots. So yeah, that's just an interesting idea of Sophia. What do you think of Eleftheria about Sophia in that context? Do you see much in the Pistis Sophia as trying to redefine what might be the definition of what would have been gained from the Shekinah out of the Jewish tradition, the presence of God on earth, the feminine presence?
That's a really interesting question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got to think a little bit about how to answer this. I don't necessarily think that what the Pistis Sophia is trying to do with the Sophia is like overtly replace the idea of the presence of God in the temple, but I can certainly see the connections that you've outlined there. That's certainly. Yeah, that's certainly that is one way that you could look at it, is that we look within for the temple now, and the presence of God in the Holy of Holies is really a metaphor for the soul within our bodies, and that's what Jesus was trying to tell us as well. That's how we get to God, by finding that little piece of God inside us, and that's how we create the temple. So while it may not have been intentional necessarily, it may have been, but I can certainly see how that all ties together. And the thing that you brought up with the Hagia Sophia as well is quite remarkable to think about as well, in terms of theophanies and the presence of God descending down, and that was named after Sophia. I mean, that can't just be a coincidence. But I think one to tie it back more historically to the Second Temple Judaism and the idea of God's presence in the temple. Already in the Qumran community and the Essenes and those types of groups, we see a recognition by some of the Jews of the day of what they saw as the corruption of the temple authorities, and not seeing the temple as something sacred anymore and looking for an alternative, which carries through into Jesus' teachings, which of course then carries through to the Gnostic teachings as well, and much more of an inner focus carrying through as well. So yeah, so we can connect all of those dots, and we can appreciate some of the similarities there, I think.
Yeah, I think too, another thing is looking at kind of what I was talking about before, these emanations and how they kind of succeed each other in an analogical way. You have the first movement is nous, which is conceived of as mind, hypostatic mind, the mind of the divine. And the next emanation is soul, psyche, right? Psyche cosmo, though, it's a world soul, which is with the paradigm or the archetype of the human soul. And psyche cosmo is always the one that descends. And you see that in myths, in mythology, in the Neoplatonic, Neo-Pythagorean, or late Platonic and Neo-Pythagorean traditions, when they talk about the fall of the soul, like the Persephonian myth. Persephone, she's also always called Kori, right? Oh, it's always a maiden. Why? Because that principle that descends, that gets pulled down, and effectively, the word they use in many of the texts is rape. It is virginal. It's not corruptible in the way that the body is corruptible, but it can be drawn further away from its source in this confusion. If it chooses to follow the body, if it chooses to follow what is really the issues of death, really, like, this is, the body dies, the body decays, the soul is immortal. In the Golden Dawn, that's like the first thing you're called when you're brought into the hall: inheritor of a dying world. And once you're initiated, you're never called that again. Because it's going from identifying with the body to identifying with the soul. So you see it in a lot of religious mythology. The soul is always a virgin who ends up being violated and drawn into the underworld. It's the myth of Persephone. It's a myth also of Eros and Psyche, which a lot of people don't realize. That is not Homeric. That is not Hesiodic. That was written by Apuleius. And Apuleius was a late Platonist. The myth of Eros and Psyche, he's the one who writes that and gives us that myth. So even there, he's talking about Psyche being the maiden, and she's chained and dragged into this relationship with a husband who is not treating her well. And so I see a lot of that in the Sophianic literature, especially the Sethian stuff, which was written probably 100 years before the Pistis Sophia. Things like the Apocryphon of John and things like that. So the Sethians were they were much more cynics. They were the people who were like, the demiurge is willfully malevolent. Valentinians, on the other hand, are not so much. They're just kind of like, yeah, he's ignorant. So there's a little bit of that spectrum of opinion of like, what are these archons? And one of the things I like about Neoplatonism is that the gods are just anthropomorphizations of the different sort of vortices of power that keep the universe in motion. But the first sort of projection of the gods. The same way that if you met me, you'd meet my face first, but there's other stuff behind me. Those are called genealogic, meaning they tend towards generation. And what they do is they go, stop, go back, reincarnate. They want you to stay bound to materiality until you prove yourself, until you prove that your soul has remembered its divine estate. So you look at something like the Petilia tablet, which is an Orphic gold tablet, a lamellate, which serves as a totem pass for these ancient Hellenistic initiates. And it basically is a little thing that is inscribed in gold that is telling the person, when you die, say this. And it starts out, you go to the first sphere, you meet a god, and you say, I am a child of earth. Any Golden Dawn, anybody? I am a child of earth and starry heaven. You yourselves know this. I am parched with thirst and dying quickly. Give me to drink of memory's spring. Memory spring. It's so again, it's that reenactment of like, yes, your soul has to remember its divinity in order to get past these initial sort of arcanic forces that want to push you towards generation. So it's really just unbelievably fascinating how it all really, it ties together perfectly with like a little Gnostic bow on it.
Do you guys want to address our super chat? Thank you again to everyone who super chats, especially given this is the second time we've ended up talking a lot about Jesus and Christians. And even though I did a whole segment on pagan hermetists, so keep that in mind. The algorithm really does. All of us noticed our channels stopped growing quite a bit when we started talking about when we touched on these things for the first time ever. So there's a lot of suppression going on there. So the super chats mean a lot. Thank you. That's all I'm saying. And we'll address this one here. Yeah, what do you guys think about this question? In the PS, it said that astrology in the Pistis Sophia is unreliable because the Christ can make the sphere spin in reverse. Does this imply astrology is wrong, or that it only applies to the uninitiated? My quick response is, in the Hermetica, the astrology affects your fate, so it affects your body, which is affected by fate, but it has no impact on your soul, your nous. And yeah, that's sort of my thoughts. But I've tried to escape astrology my whole life to no avail, so take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And what it's really saying there, I think, is like you've got the powers of the stars over our lives, but the power of spirit, of God, of the soul, whatever you want to call it, is more powerful and kind of not supersedes, but it's unaffected by them and can affect them, but it's not subject to their influence in the same way that our physical bodies are. So while you can have, unfavorable aspects, or you could be living through a Mercury retrograde or whatever it is, and that can affect your environment, and it can affect all of these things by the theory of astrology. You can go along with that, or you can choose to do something different, and you can go against those influences and exert your will to change your reality, which is why we're able to escape the world of the archons to return to heaven. And so that's the power of the spirit, and that's the power of the divine, and I think that's what it's trying to say.
Before you move to this other question that's up on screen, it's hard to answer. I think it's hard to talk about this without us addressing the elephant in the room, which is our hexagram rituals, which we all work with. And I've often, throughout the years or decades, dear Lord, this is my 30-year anniversary of my neophyte initiation. And actually the actual anniversary is this November over the same weekend, I believe, as EnochiaCon. I didn't realize that when I was booking it till my friend from Austin called me up. He's like, hey, man, 30 years this year. I'm like, damn, me too. Oh, my God. So we use these hexagram rituals, and I've heard that they're meant to banish astrological influences. I've heard they're meant to purify them. I've heard they're meant to draw in just macrocosmic force, many different theories. And of course, our theories change and grow based on our practice of these rituals and what tradition we're using them in, what the parameters are of the tradition we're in, you know, how we think about them, what our intention or focus is, has an impact. So that's why they're not necessarily the same thing when two different people do them exactly, because you might have complete different foci in your mind and your soul. And I think the reason that they mainly work on the planets, or alternately for, you know, in Golden Dawn magic, we don't necessarily wait for an election to consecrate a talisman. We do all these complex rituals, and sometimes they're not actually that complex, secret, is to draw in the planetary forces into our space. And how could we do that? How can we possibly do that? Well, the Hermetica has a clear answer. It sounds like Gnosticism does too, right? Through our connection to the divine. Through that divine connection, we can be all places, know all things. Therefore, why can't we draw in the planetary influence we actually want to experience, as opposed to waiting 2 years for the right conjunction or aspect? So, you know, planetary alignment / planetary, for lack of a better word, manipulation through the nous, through our daimon, through our soul and spirit. That's something I think worth mentioning, given the question that was asked.
Well, also too, and this is what I've always found very interesting, because when I first came to the Golden Dawn, I hated the color schemes. It reminds me of like a preschool, like daycare. It's like yeah, because why? Because it's all primary colors, you know. But the thing is, the idea behind it, and however much credence anyone that's watching or you guys want to give to it, so be it. But the idea behind the color magic of the Golden Dawn is that they viewed color as a force in and of itself, similar to sound. It's not symbolic. It's not etheric. You know, there are ways of using color to draw that. You know, the flashing tablets are supposed to draw the ether into little whirlpools and stuff, according to Reggerty and some other people. Fine. But the main thing about color magic is that it was meant to sort of supersede and get rid of like having to go and cut a switch of hazel at a certain, you know, phase of moon with just a little bit of the morning's dew on it, and things like that. It was meant to make it so that we could do magic a little bit more on demand. But I also think the hexagram rituals in particular, it's at least when I do them, we're invoking the entire hierarchy. We're invoking invoking the highest first, and working from the divine name of the Sphira all the way down through, archangels, angelic choir, the heaven of Isaiah, right? So the Hebrew name for the planet, the governing angel, the intelligence and the spirit, all the way down. And so you get like the full sort of intelligence profile in something like, in Golden Dawn magic, period. And I think that also helps, right, us connect. We're supposed to connect with that ontological hierarchy in some way and draw it forth down into our sphere of working. That's just some Golden Dawn nerd shit.
And to get even nerdier, a lot of modern magicians won't have this context, and some from different Golden Dawn orders might not even know this. But those hexagram rituals are only done after 5 = 6. Right, which, and the answer, why would we wait so long to give someone that ritual? Well, the answer is in the literal numbers of the grade. 5 = 6. So someone's making a clever comment, thinking it's some Jewish conspiracy thing or whatever. It's demonic. It's Star of David. Blah blah blah. Sorry, it's Pythagorean. It's numerical. Is the answer to that mystery? If you look at the actual mystery, you'll find something much more interesting than conspiracy theory. And yeah, why would we be able to access the planets in 5 = 6 in Tiferet? Because you've been fully initiated to that state of higher consciousness, and you have formalized your access to it. Everyone has access to it. Not everyone can access it, and not everyone chooses to. But the adept in the Golden Dawn tradition finally gains access through this grand initiation into the solar sphere, and therefore we have access to the hexagram at last. But it's something you build up. You don't have access to it in the formal Golden Dawn in the Outer Order. Many orders have changed that now to flesh out the Outer Order, of course, but that's another matter. Well, we got to keep this moving. I guess I'm front man, so I got to keep us moving along. We'll just touch on this question briefly, and then we'll get on to the next segment. Are the pre-Olympian gods and transclipothic entities similar? What are transclipothic entities? You're the one who made the phrase transclipothic entities, so I don't know. You tell us, unless one of my cohorts here actually knows what you're talking about. I mean, the jokes come a mile a minute to my mind at this point, but I will refrain. Yeah, pre-Olympian gods. I mean, what's that? Are those the gods Greeks worshipped? I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna be good faith here. Gods prior to the Greek gods. I mean,
I think those are the gods that H.P.
similar?
Lovecraft wrote about.
I mean, it's very weird to compare pre-Olympian gods prior to Greek culture with Clifoth that don't exist till the Middle Ages, and even then, they're seen as shells or husk around aspects of God. They're not seen as actual beings. It wasn't until I think, the Zohar that they were formalized as demons. And even then, I don't know how much in the Zohar they're seen as entities. I know in the main book on the Qliphoth, which has never been translated, the Book of Horns, Book O' Horns, that's the Irish translation. The Book of Horns, the Sefer Karnaim, which needs translation, and I paid a professor to do it once, but they ripped me off. And it's an amazing text, and the rabbi who wrote it was massacred by the Cossacks along with his entire synagogue as part of the pogroms in Poland. It's a very tragic end to a fellow who wrote trying to elucidate the nature of the Qliphoth. So the Qliphoth are seen differently in different Jewish traditions. I don't see them as entities at all, ever. To me, the Qliphoth are not entities. And it would be very dangerous, I think, for me to start treating them as such. I treat them as precursors, as obstacles to the sphere. So there's a shell or a husk around each sphere, and to access the sphere, I have to transmute the Qliphoth and go through that Qliphoth, right? For me to access the sphere of charity and reach into my pocket and give a $5 bill to a guy on the street, I have to go through the Qliphoth that says, no, you don't have enough. No, he'll spend it on drugs. No. Don't give. And all giving is from God. So I have to penetrate that shell, that husk, to the grain and access the divine. So that's sort of another way of seeing them. And you don't have to take my view of the Qliphoth. Obviously, there's lots of different views of them, but yeah, trans-Qliphoth is a fun phrase.
Yeah, but I think maybe I don't know, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, did this person mean like the Titans? Because I could see that sort of Lurian thing, the Isaac Luria, right? The idea that there was a first creation that failed, and its husks ended up being the Qliphotic base upon which the second creation, which succeeds. I could see what they're thinking there because, right, I mean, Uranus and Kronos, they were eating their children, and so it's kind of like creation cannot stabilize. Order cannot prevail in the universe. In the same way, we get this whole idea of it's particularly the Golden Dawn from Lurianic Kabbalah, which says that this, there's that halal apanui with that vacated space that that God or the light projects, right, transmits into that womb, that space. It's shefa, it's downpouring force, and the first creation does not prevail. So I can see what they're thinking, but I would say that it's to Frater RC's point. Don't conflate them. Keep them side by side, but don't conflate them because it's historically anachronistic to say that the Titanic version of creation ended up being the Qliphoth. It could be an interesting kind of way of approaching it in your own personal work, but we can't really say anything very definitive about it while trying to be responsible, I don't think.
The Sefer Bahir does talk about them as the shattering of the vessels. I think that's in the Zohar as well. Maybe it first came in the Bahir, but they're seen as cosmic forces or cosmic impediments, or the shells and dross maybe from the original creation, and what do you do with them then? But again, every tradition treats them differently. The way the Golden Dawn grade material initiations treat them is very specific, not necessarily precise, because again, in the Golden Dawn, it's not a religion, you know, so they don't want to define things or over define things, because how you define an angel in the Golden Dawn, or a Qliphoth, or a spirit even, has to be left up to each person's religion. Otherwise, it wouldn't really be an order open to all religions, would it? It's not. You're not really open to another religion if you're like, yeah, come on in, and this is what you believe. No, it's you get to. That's you. You decide what you believe. It's just, here's the system, and yeah. Let's move on. We don't. None of us have a bone to pick with Catholicism, I don't think.
I would just say, as a lifelong Catholic, up until, you know, just a handful of years ago, where I identify with a different type of Christianity, the only bone I got 2 bones to pick with them. No more Vatican II. Hate that. I want to go back to Tridentine Mass, and stop touching kids.
Hey man, Vatican City
Amen.
raised the age of consent for young boys up to 14. It was 9. So yeah, we're totally gonna get, the algorithm's gonna love this. All right, so we're gonna move on to Ike Baker, and we'll wrap up with Sky, if that's okay, Sky. Yeah, just shake your pretty head. All right, so
Let's do
Ike
it.
Baker,
Sky, did you
let's
finish your drinks yet? Or?
Actually, no, I haven't.
Oh wow, good for you.
Here is the intro clip. Hopefully it plays smoothly for you all. And we are moving on to our next topic with Ike. Here you go.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about the Desert Fathers. For anybody here that subscribes to my newsletter, I've been doing a series on demons, because I did a series on angels a little while back, and this one's called "What in the Hell is a Demon?" Today's newsletter was part 2, and I went into, I kind of parlayed into Christian demonology and exorcism. This is a big topic. I think that the ideas and you know, trends are kind of forming around the idea of spiritual warfare. But what that meant for early Christians means something very different, I think, than a lot of us would assume. I think a lot of people think of spiritual warfare and they think of like the Templars, you know, they think of that chivalric kind of drawn sword sort of thing, when the early desert fathers and desert mothers, really, because they do get washed out of the story, and they were just as important. It was a group of men and women who came together in a community to form what would become monasticism. This was the beginning of Christian monasticism. And many people attribute this kind of lifestyle to the Roman Egyptian Saint Anthony the Great. But Saint Jerome kind of writes about this other guy. He says, well, everybody thinks it's Anthony the Great who started the monastic lifestyle out in the desert, but there was another person named Paul of Thebes, and at 16 years old, he was run out of town because there was still the Roman persecution going on, and in the 2nd century, and he ends up seeking refuge in a cave in the mountains, and he lives there for the rest of his life. And Saint Anthony the Great is 90 years old when he receives a dream that tells him there's somebody who's greater than you, greater ascetic than you, greater at spiritual warfare. You must go and find him. And so he sets out into the desert at 90 years old, and he finds Paul of Thebes, and they embrace. And when when St. Anthony goes back to meet him a second time after conversing with him for a day and a night, he's dead. And he gives him an honorable burial. And this effectively starts the Christian monastic tradition that would manifest in the Eastern Church as something like Mount Athos and the beautiful and famous monastery there, but also in the West in the rule of Saint Benedict. It was the beginning of monasticism. And this group of Coptic Christians in the Theban desert and in parts, surrounding Alexandria as we get into the 3rd and 4th centuries, but primarily in Egypt, this was going on contemporaneous with the late Platonic and Hermetic traditions at that time. So why did they go into the desert to pray and to live as a community and be threadbare and be limited in their resources and what they could eat, what they could buy and trade, etc.? Well, we can look at what they tell us firsthand. They say, we came out here to engage in spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare is the name of the game. So a lot of people nowadays, they look at spiritual warfare and they think about some sort of liberation that happens in towns, in cities. These people wanted to get out of the towns, out of the cities, because they understood that spiritual warfare is an interior battle. And again, I pointed to it earlier. You have a lot of external taboos that establish the Jewish culture. You have a lot of things that they do that separate them from other people. Christians ultimately adopt some of these things like circumcision and so on and so forth. But the main message of Christ, right, as the paradigmatic, the archetypal exorcist healer, because you don't really have exorcism the same way you do in Christianity early on. You get things like the mashmashu in Mesopotamian culture. The demons that they're kind of fighting against are actually imparting or afflicting a person with disease and illness. And so the mashmashu use magic, incantations, and various ritual implements to heal this person, but they're not priests, and they're not necessarily doing battle with a demon so much as they're using magic to heal this person. Now, in Christianity, right, particularly in the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew, Mark is probably the better example. Jesus encounters a lot of demonically possessed people who are sick, who are ill, mentally ill, physically ill. And he casts them out in that very famous, version in Mark where he says, "Tell me your name." And the demon says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And then he casts them out, and the demons say, please let us go into the pigs. And so he says, "Go." Jesus casts them into the pigs. They go into the water and drown. It's a very stark example of that. You don't see that really anywhere until about that time. Now, shortly after that, in things like the Corpus Hermeticum 13, Corpus Hermeticum 14, really 13, you start talking about these daimones that possess the soul. They're called the tormentors. Okay, and there's talk of 12 of them in Corpus Hermeticum 13, right? The signs of the zodiac that Frater Eleftheria was talking about before. And I'm going to contextualize this a bit. I don't want to go too far afield in either direction. I'm going to push forward. They believed that spiritual warfare was predicated on logismi, thoughts. Because in other cultures, or let's say Hollywood, right? Hollywood wants us to frothing at the mouth and biting heads off of birds, like it's doing horrible, obscene things with the crucifix. That was not necessarily what demonic possession or quote unquote attachment or attack was to them. It was a voice that spoke to them very subtly, encouraging them, right? Like the kakodaimones, I believe that Frater RC mentioned earlier, that encouraged them to don't do it now. Very similar, you're a man. You're a man, right? St. Anthony is tempted that way. He fasts regularly like Christ did in the desert. And a demon appears to him and in the form of, I think, a raven. I can't remember exactly what. And he says, yeah, but you're a man. You're made of body too. If you don't eat, you're going to wither away. And he's almost tempted, and then he sees his ruse. And it's much like the way Jesus is tempted in the desert by Satan. He's not tempted. It's just very subtle interior manipulation, pushing you towards what? One thing: worldly wisdom. Worldly wisdom. Wisdom that makes sense if you're working from a world first perspective. Okay. Yeah, of course. If I don't eat, I'm going to die, but at the same time, the body can subsist on much less than the stomach tells us. And this is because a lot of times the body, and this is incredible because Joe Dispenza talks about this, the body thinks it's the mind. The soma takes over for the nous. This is what Plato meant when he talked about the three parts of the soul. The lowest being appetitive. It's the appetites. The middle being the spirited, which is mostly anger. And the top, the highest part of the soul being the reason. Nous, logistikon, he called it. The reasoning faculty, which is your nous, which is Frater RC mentioned earlier. This is it is a daimon. The soul is a lesser god, according to a lot of these, because it's a part of the god. So the desert fathers and mothers, one of the main things that they fought against were the appetites. And one of them was lust, right? I mean, just people. There's some stuff in early monastic records, right? We think of these people as all buttoned up, put together. And some of them, the young monks were when they went into town, they were visiting prostitutes. There's records of this stuff. So they did battle. St. Anthony, there's a very famous painting called The Torment of St. Anthony, and he's being pulled apart by demons. And this is, communicated to us in things like the Philokalia, and talking about how he's tempted in his thoughts, primarily in his thoughts, right? So they say we got to get out of the cities. Why? Because there's so much there that leads us in distracting ways, right? Either it's the cornucopia of pleasures and things I can acquire, or on the other side of the fence, the threadbare necessity. I need to steal to feed my family. We were impoverished, so on and so forth. So they leave to go and do this interior battle, this interior fight against demons. And you get a lot of incredible techniques that I won't go too far into. One interesting one that I like to mention, and that I mentioned in the newsletter, is there was a desert father named Evagrius of Pontus, and he wrote about a technique, an exorcistic technique, or a technique of spiritual warfare called driving a nail out with a nail. And as a carpenter, I've done this before. So you can't get this, you can't pull this fucker out. I'm going to get a nail and I'm going to push it out through the other end. And the way that he talks about that is that if you are being tempted with lust, you must use the force of vainglory. And invoke a thought of vainglory, because it will drive out the lust. This is a very advanced kind of technique, but he says if you master it, you will learn how to push out a demonic thought with a human one. And that training in and of itself will teach you how to push this stuff out. Now, I want to tie this in to the late Platonic and Hermetic traditions, which were happening at the same time in the same places. The first one I want to talk about is a really interesting series of fragments by Porphyry, right? Porphyry of Tyre, who was a late Platonic philosopher. He was a student of Plotinus. He wrote a treatise we have in fragments. It's called On What Is Up to Us, or On What Is Within Our Power. And it's kind of a treatise on free will versus determinism. And he errs on the side of free will. He's like, no, there are things that we can do to get above our, as Frater RC mentioned earlier, our astrological weather, right? We can use our soul to get above the deterministic elements. But he, in describing this, he lists, he describes also the descent of the soul, which is an allegory for its it's being imbued with two things. He says that as the soul descends into materiality at each one of the planetary spheres, it is invested with a vice and a virtue. Now, anybody that's familiar with the Golden Dawn or even just the Sefer Yetzirah, you know that we talk about the 7 double letters that represent the planets, the planetary powers, and their various positive and negative poles. So Porphyry talks about how each one of these positive and negative poles are imprinted on the soul, and they're imprinted as a vice and as a virtue. So he calls these astral garments or accretions that are put on the soul and weigh it down and make the one spherical tunic of light, body of light, the spiritual vehicle, the one spherical vehicle, it makes it angular and abused, traumatized. And then finally, it is tied to the material body, now invested with these various vices and virtues. Now you have something in, I think, Corpus Hermeticum. I forget which one the Pymander is. It's either 1 or 2. But in the divine Pymander or Pimandres, you effectively get this ascent model that is the divestiture of vice. At the first sphere, the body's cast off. At the second sphere, greed, lying in wait, avarice, appetite, as you go up through 7 spheres. The soul is divested of the vice specifically. This is a huge part of the theurgic ascent. Now, I want to read a couple of things from the Corpus Hermeticum. Particularly, I'm going to start out with the Corpus Hermeticum 13. This one's called The Secret Sermon on the Mountain. Hermes says to his son Tot, "Withdraw into thyself, and it will come. Will, and it comes to pass. Throw out of work the body's senses, and your divinity shall come to birth. Purge from thyself the brutish torments, things of matter." And Tot responds, "I have tormentors then in me, O father?" And Hermes says, "Yes, my son, no few, fearful ones and manifold." Tot responds, "I do not know them, father." Hermes says, "Torment the first is this not knowing, son. The second one is grief. The third, intemperance. The fourth, concupiscence. The fifth, unrighteousness. The sixth is avarice. The seventh, error. The eighth is envy. The ninth, guile. The 10th, anger. 11th, rashness. And the 12th is malice. These are in number 12, but under them are many more, my son. And creeping through the prison of the body, they force the man that's placed therein to suffer in his senses. But they depart from him who hath been taken pity on by God. And this is it which constitutes the manner of rebirth." So this is from the GRS Mead translation. It's not a scholarly translation, but I want to just compare this with what Plotinus says in the 8th tractate of the Enneads. He says, quote, "The soul is a divine being and a dweller in loftier realms, but has entered a body. It is a god, a later phase of the divine, but under stress of its powers and its tendency to bring order to what is below it. It penetrates to this sphere in a voluntary plunge. If it turns back quickly, all is well. It will have taken no hurt by acquiring the knowledge of evil." What's that sound like? The Garden of Eden. We bite the apple. Now you've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Out you go. So if it turns back quickly, all is well. It will have taken no hurt by acquiring knowledge of evil and coming to understand what sin is. The final thing that I want to quote here before I open it up to you guys is Corpus Hermeticum 10, the key. Quote, "But if a soul on entering a body persists in its vice, it neither tastes deathlessness nor shares in the good, but speeding back again, it turns into the path that leads to creeping things. And the soul's vice is ignorance. For that the soul who has no knowledge of the things that are, or knowledge of their nature or of good, is blinded by the body's passions and tossed about. This wretched soul, not knowing what she is, becomes the slave of bodies of strange form and sorry plight, bearing her body as a load, not as a ruler, but as the ruled. So in this iteration, the Corpus Hermeticum is not necessarily entirely optimistic in terms of the basic state. Where I would find that it is optimistic is that it's telling us there is a model of ascent. We can do it. There is eternal life. God does love us. And we can access this stuff specifically, to Frater RC's point earlier, with our nous, with that highest part of the soul. And it involves the divestiture of vice. Now, when you read this stuff and you get into theurgy and you get into philosophy, it's all very complex. And you're like thinking like it's, I don't know, I got to commandeer this circuit. And if you want to understand how this is functionally done, you can read the Philokalia, okay? The love of what is good, or the love of the beautiful. Those are the right. It contains many of the writings of the Desert Fathers, particularly, and the work of the Desert Mothers. I would look into, because they're giving the technique for the divestiture, the defeat of vice. That is the internal battle of spiritual warfare against things that want to make the soul habitually identify with the body. And this is why in all of those models of ascent, at each sphere, you must prove that your soul remembers, I'm not the body. And this is put in various mythopoetical ways. But so I think that's it. Maybe nobody has anything to say about that, but I think it dovetailed. It kind of, I think it fit well with what Frater Eleftheria was leading with, for sure, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. I do have just a quick question. Is there any relationship between the Desert Fathers and the Church Fathers?
Well, the relationship is that they are the some of the earliest Christians who actually, Evagrius of Pontus was for an ascetic, like an extremely prolific writer. Dozens of letters, commentaries, so on. So he actually pioneered demonic taxonomy. So it's all of the, which is the classification of these beings. But that's all just to say that they operated within what we could now comfortably in modern Catholicism, modern Orthodoxy, uppercase O Orthodoxy, but also lowercase o Orthodoxy. They all agree with the Orthodox dogma. And so they're incorporated into the canon of the early formative church fathers. And you get people, like Irenaeus of Lyons. He's a much less likable character because he's a heresiologist. He's basically condemning huge swaths of early Christians because they don't believe what he believes. But, as we say, winners write the history books. So they're what I would say is that whereas the earlier church fathers like Tertullian and these people who were in Rome, in Alexandria, in the cities, these people were much more like systematizers of dogma, or doctrine. Let's be nice, right, and say doctrine. Why not? But the Desert Fathers were on the opposite end of the spectrum. They were mystics. They were mystics who, I don't give a shit what you believe. I care about what you fucking do. Okay, right. That's why they went out. They didn't accept the throne and the pointy hat and the robes and the titles. They're like, I'm literally going to wipe my ass with my hand in the desert until I die. So it's, they didn't accept all that horse shit. And they went out and they wrote some of the most beautiful salvific literature that the human race has ever produced. But we don't read it. It's huge in the Orthodox Church. It's huge in Orthodoxy. They love this stuff. And also, it's right in their wheelhouse because it's all written in Greek. So, but anyway, there is a relationship there. They're two opposite ends of the early Christian spectrum.
That was, yeah, I really loved your bit. And I'm realizing now how much all of us have touched on Gnosticism or Gnosis, either through Pistis Sophia and the Hermetica. We'll probably have to title this episode something like to do with the Corpus Hermeticum or Hermetica and Gnosis or something like that. I'm definitely going to tell David Litwa we covered his field quite a bit in this, and you know, we'll hopefully next time, hopefully we do this in a month, we'll have both an intro video. Me and Sky are going to work on something or something like that. Have a fun intro video for you guys. We'll work on the production of doing this, but also we'll hopefully have more news on Dr. Litwa's ultimate version of the Hermetica, which is a real treat. There was something I want to say about it, but it just escaped my mind. Hesychasm, someone is saying there. Yeah, hesychasm, that's the word. That is the word.
Yeah.
There's an interesting book that also is worth referencing. It's a book that's I would call it historiographically weak, like in terms of analyzing patterns of history. I think it's slightly weak, although I don't love saying that, but it's like, you know, anytime you reduce major trends throughout history to a pattern, you're picking and choosing a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you say there's this stream and then there's this stream, it's like, oh, well, obviously it's way more complicated than that. But that disclaimer aside, a really fun book is Holy Heretics by Frater Acher. Frater Acher, Acher. And you can get it in paperback, gorgeously printed and made by Scarlet Imprint, who are wonderful people. And now let's get on to the questions about summoning demons and killing animals. No, don't sacrifice animals, people, in Magic. Seriously, that's disgusting. That's disgusting.
As Porphyry also wrote on abstinence from animal flesh, he talks about the only kind of daimones that want blood are the kind you do not want to associate with.
That's
Exactly.
the kind that the elites are in contact with.
Speaking of elites, we should do a whole one of these months. We should bite the bullet and do an episode and each bring our favorite occult conspiracy theory.
I'd
Yes,
love that.
please.
That would be a fun one. I'd also love to do an episode like this because we need ideas, people. Should send us ideas for ways to, I think this format works pretty well. It's actually taken way longer than I thought, and we've moved at a pretty choppy pace, so that's cool. But another one thing that would be fun is ritual practice, and we could all bring maybe a story from a diary or a series of diary exhibits that tell a little bit about our progress through a particular technique, ritual, or experience, or series of experiences, something like that. Aletheria, you've become famous basically in the occult worldwide for sharing exactly that stuff. So I'm thinking this is right up your alley as well. The history stuff's fun. Not everyone's cup of tea, but we're definitely people. We talked about doing an episode on like talking about crystals and energy and feelings and stuff. So that's coming. You'll see us four dudes talking about our
Feelings and stuff
at some point for hours. We're just going to talk about our crystals and everything.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite materia magica to boof?
I was just going to say on that topic, like, here's something interesting to do with the Hermetic tradition and the Hermetic prayer of Thanksgiving. Right, there's the consumption of the food afterward. I was trying to find a word for food that didn't include animal or living creatures. There's the consumption, but also, sometimes you forget to, especially us magicians, sometimes we don't have incense, or we can have smoke detectors, or we just forget to get it, and people are like, oh, there's no incense. Well, here's a fun thing about the Hermetica. It actually forbids the use of incense and chastises it. So anytime you forget your incense or don't have incense for your work, or your students are like, hey, why don't we have any incense, blah blah blah, you can just be like, yeah, we're being traditionalists, we're just being traditional hermetists and abstaining from that corrupting incense. I'm sure that was because the Hermetic community of Alexandria, they were pushing back against the temple priests. Like Zosimos was probably a temple priest who had, those temples were shut down, I believe, at that time, or they were separated. There was priests outside of the temple system, but I think it was more the temple system had collapsed, and there was priests that had come from it and were bringing their teachings to the community of people in Alexandria, and so yeah, they were pushing back away against not just Greek intellectualism, but also against a lot of the accoutrements of temple worship and the things that require wealth and riches, for example. That's what incense essentially was. And the last thought I had, Ike, about what you said is it sprung to mind, of course, the screw tape letters, which I'm proud to say is one of my favorite things I've done on my YouTube channel, but it's also the least watched thing I've done on my YouTube channel. So if anyone's curious about the screw tape letters, it's exactly that. C.S. Lewis very effectively describing how demons would dissuade us and draw us into sin, and how you could even use one sin to lead to another, but you got to be careful because the enemy, and the enemy means God, of course, in this from the demons. Watch out for the enemy and his servants, right? That's the God and his angels. They have all these, they know our tricks well, you know, because God will use the devil's tricks against them to save the soul. So those are fun videos. I made videos for each of them, and my voice increasingly as I went through the chapters of the book just got shredded, because each time I would do a demon voice, it would get more and more intense till the end. I was like, you know, and it's fun. It's fun. They're a good listen. They're popular in my audio format, but the videos I did just didn't get many watches, but I think they're worthwhile. So shout out to my screw tape letters audiobook videos, whatever.
Final
any questions
boss
you guys want to address?
Final boss demons, like, right, like the last demon voice was probably like the most scary, the most demonic.
I mean, I like re-listening to them. I thought I did a good job. Where is what written? Caught the end. The screw tape letters? I don't know what you're referring to in this comment here. Abraham. Yeah. All right. I don't know if there's any comments you guys want to address here. If anyone's on it, there's too many comments to address. That's why we have to demand super chats to really pay attention to this stuff. There's just so many great. I would
you.
in a perfect world, we sit here and go through every single one of them all night. That would be my preference, but then we would never leave here.
We should, you know what we could, you know, we could do, we could go through the shitty ones and just like the ones that are like rage baiting and stuff, and between the four of us, we could just tear them apart, like put them on the rack, because a lot of these people are fools. But but no, maybe we'll do a special episode where that happens.
There's wisdom that comes sometimes from that approach too, as well. You sometimes say, hey, you know, I can't help you with that. Like the guy who wants to summon use biblical real rituals like in the Bible to summon demons and become like God. It's like, well, you know, those rituals aren't really there in the Bible, and you know, we've spent this entire time outlining the Gnostic and Hermetic route to be God, or like a god, or your God self, you know. So I don't know how we could have gone more into depth on that pathway, though of course most people find out when it revolves around, you know, thanksgiving and gratitude and love and prayer, usually lose interest in those pathways if you're looking for power or anything like that. And yeah, no, all demons are not evil. Here's a last comment. See, this is the guy who's been wondering things. I'll put you on the screen, brother. Supreme God Sovereign. Good luck finding your pathway to demons. There's plenty of grimoires that'll help you with that, and plenty of magicians out there. Without E.A. Quetting might be your guy. All demons are not evil and all angels are not good. Foolish to believe that. Yeah, that's exactly what we've been saying all day and all night. That is exactly the ancient belief about daimones. And so pay attention to what we said, and we're addressing that indeed perfectly. So yeah, daimones are daimones, and they're all a little dirty. Even the creator in the cosmos, right, which is equivalent to the demiurge in Gnosticism, is a little dirty. Everything that's not monad, only the monad is purely good and purely pure. Everything else is a little dirty, and dirty means unclean, and unclean means evil.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that also kind of comes from this Pythagorean thing where, yes, you have the monad, the one alone, and then the two is the dyad, and that represents separation. But that the root of that word dyad is the etymological root of the word diabolos, devil. So it's like everything after the monad is kind of fucked up. As you're saying, it's dirty.
Right. Our final show of the night is a segment by our beautiful, handsome Sky, who many of the women in the comments have been swooning over, men too, probably. The audience is half here for our good lookers in the crowd. This is a super chat, so we'll throw it on screen. I have no idea what the person is saying. Why does sex make babies? Well, I don't know what SECCS means, but I guess that's to get past censorship. Why does sex make babies? Well, when two people love each other very much. All right. Our next segment is with Sky, and it is on this topic. Here is the video. Hopefully you can see it relatively well.
All right. All right. So my little bit here, these are just my thoughts. I really don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Just trying. So whatever. It's not a heavy focus on the Hermetic Asclepius text, although I did touch a little bit on that. And I think that there's probably a lot more that could be added in relation. But I'm taking an angle more with Asclepius as the god of healing and medicine. So I was watching Chris Brennan's channel on this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and it's all about vibes of ontological crisis and reality distortion, where reality gets blurry, structures dissolve, and so on, and how we can't distinguish what's real anymore. He used examples of things that are happening, or that had happened in the past, like the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So yeah, themes of conspiracies, secret groups, exposure of hidden networks, covert operations, all these sort of things. So I thought it was really good and fun and entertaining. And yeah, right now we are definitely like in the midst of seeing what's been unraveling with all of these like Epstein files and this organized global criminal network. Then we have like Israel versus Palestine, Israel and Lebanon, Iran, Venezuela, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, all kinds of just endless shit. All these systems and structures crumbling or loosening, just kind of like losing coherence, and the blurring of narratives about what's really going on. And nobody seems to be able to distinguish like what's true from fake. It's all about trying to figure out like what is real, what's real, what's fake here, what's truth, what's a lie. And so the conjunction happens at exactly 0 degrees Aries, which is interesting. It's just the very beginning of the zodiac, I believe February 20th. So you got martial tones of heroic or combative nature. So I think ultimately Brennan's contention is like kind of takeaway was saying it kind of lends to an indication of the fog being weaponized as we kind of pass through this threshold. And so I thought it was really interesting. And so I just wanted to put that as the kind of forefront before I go on. So with that said, I was thinking about, our topics. Yesterday I was just thinking about this and how to prepare for what I was wanting to share, being Asclepius, and how it's actually extremely relevant because with this theme of ontological crisis, inducing a recalibration of how we're kind of reordering our conceptions of reality as our old conceptions dissolve and our awareness adapts. We are simultaneously seeing this explosion of things like theurgy in the zeitgeist, not just theurgy, but definitely theurgy. And I think it's a result of the fact that people are just so spiritually sick and they're reaching for medicine that actually works out of necessity. So the god of medicine and healing, Asclepius, becomes extremely relevant. And the Asclepius teaches us that humanity's role is basically to assist the gods in maintaining cosmic order through reverence, stewardship, and maintenance of the cosmos through the imitation of God. And so last night was kind of crazy. I was feeling pretty mentally stagnant. So I smoked some weed, as I do on occasion. And I was just having an explosion of revelations and inspiration. So Meg and I did some bibliomancy with the Bhagavad Gita and opened up to a part about devotional work and bhakti. And it was talking about how ordinary tasks become sacred when done in devotion, and the difference between action and divine action, and how bhakti transforms binding action into liberating service. And so it reminded me, essentially of like God working or theurgic work. And so RC, you're kind of like pushing for this podcast to have more of a structured approach. So I flipped my magical Saturnian hourglass that I made kind of as a talisman during an election that Jamie Lamb had helped me identify about a year or two ago. And basically, I use it for sacralizing Saturnian work. I'll use it, just to clean or organize and beautify the house. I'll flip it and put on some music and just go into kind of a flow state. And yeah, I feel it's very much that thing of uh, work becomes this devotional, intentional, and enjoyable thing versus like a chore. And so earlier in the day, I was listening to this podcast with Aubrey Marcus. Um, he's had this guy on that was just like all in on like moral relativism theory. And I was just ruminating on it. I talked with RC today actually about that, and he was watching it as well. So I think he probably could share some thoughts later on, but I just wanted to put that out there. So, I was going over my notes and contemplating time and sacred time and thinking about the sacred and the profane and the idea of cosmosizing and how it really is like the cure, and how like everyone wants liberation, but nobody wants constriction. And that's why nothing seems to hold. It's like the difference between building a house with like toothpicks or, versus like a house of stone. Like toothpicks are cheaper and they're easier, but it's weak and it's flimsy. Like stone requires more work, but it withstands and it holds. And so I was thinking about how people often think of Saturn as this like oppressive buzzkill of limitation, but Saturn's actually very Asclepian. It's like the serpent with the spine, and the Asclepian symbol of the serpent and the staff exemplifies this like quite well. It coils and binds and disciplines force through intelligent restriction. So, in regards to how I think this relates to the astrology, Asclepius being serpentine, earthy, and disciplined, conjoined with the dissolution, kind of imaginal ocean of Neptune. Neptune is like kind of melting rigid structures while Saturn reins it back. And Asclepius is this focal point that shows us how to work inside the body, like the body of the world, instead of trying to escape the world. And Asclepius doesn't heal by removing suffering or bypassing the body, but by restoring order within it. His medicine is chthonic and grounded and measured and aimed at bringing life back into rhythm, proportion, and lawful relation with the forces that govern it. So many people think of the world as this thing that just falls apart because matter is evil. But I think that often it falls apart because of this disregard for measure. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with like the ideas of like Pythagoreanism and like all of that. So, yeah, see Ike's Music as Magic class for more on that. Because what holds things together is harmony, and there's a particular relationship of proportion and measure that are like the building blocks of what constitutes harmony. But yeah, I thought how interesting is it that in the abaton of the Asclepions, where they would do dream incubation or incoimesis, how interesting that this healing was done through dream and vision, which is very Neptunian, but not like in the sense of like a psychedelic trip type way where it was for like some just like ecstatic frenzy or escapism type thing, but a structured, anchored way that is like dedicated with like a sacred temple with methodical intention and procedures and protocols and all of that. And it wasn't always like it's not like you just had a vision or a dream and that was just that. Like the dreams weren't treated as personal fantasies, but they were more like a response from a sacred aligned connection to the god of healing. And so the Asclepions, they were highly regulated places and they required ritual purity, silence, diet, timing. There was a strict order to all of it. So I just thought that that was very like Saturnian. And So they would have like a therapeuti that would often help kind of looking at the dream, and they would offer some sort of prescription that was unique to each individual. So then you have Aries at 0 degrees, and it's like this ignition switch. So it's like a fire that we can apply Asclepian discipline to, and sort of inspiring, but also disorienting. And that, the combination of Mars and Neptune, it's almost kind of like turning that fire into like a radiating plasma, like an unstable plasma, but ordered by Saturn, like Saturnian vibes, like it's like imposing form. So I had this idea of Asclepius doesn't reject fire, but he regulates it. Um, and so like in a therapeutic analogy, you could say like inflammation, it destroys when it's like uncontained or something like that. But so the Asclepions, there are these places, patients went to in time of a crisis. They were going there for healing. So I would say that it's all super relevant because we are in a very Asclepian moment on a collective scale, and civilization itself seems like it has been placed into some sort of inkoimesis. Like people are experiencing lucidity in this dream of life. And, then we have Aries ensuring that movement and action, it's inevitable. It's inevitably going to come, like something must be initiated. So, I have Saturn that's kind of like insisting on this like sober, sacrificial, disciplined uh tones, and then Neptune ensuring that it all be guided by meaning rather than control. So the moral of the story is healing, initiation, and renewal are all possible, but only through disciplined beginnings. The shift is about to get lit at 0 degrees, but whether it becomes a hearth or a wildfire depends entirely on how well it is contained. And although we may not have the power to control external things, we can control the fire within and how we direct it. So, yeah, make your life a fire altar and sacralize your existence. And I know that you've been to, I think it was maybe Pergamon or something with Sarah Janes.
No, I was at Epidavros.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it was the site of the ancient Asclepion, which is I want to say it's probably about an hour and 40 minutes south of Athens. And it was really amazing. Well, first off, Sarah is amazing. And she just had this amazing wizard's cloak that she wore, and she led us through the mountains, and we were eating like wild oregano and flowers and stuff. And she took us, the interesting thing is that there's sort of an amphitheater there because music and plays, comedy, were part of the healing. But there were also these big incubation halls for dream incubation, and there were altars and things like that. The curious thing is that there was a place for fire to have this like sauna sort of sweat effect, and then there were cooling and cleansing baths. And so, and the thing about the amphitheater is that there's a little piece of marble. There's a marking on a piece of marble where if you stand in that spot and you speak directly towards the seats, it's so acoustically honed that it not only projects your voice as if you're like right in the person's face at the top of the amphitheater, but your voice is slapping back to you so that it's almost like you're hearing your own voice in your own face. And so right there, it's like you have water, fire, and air as part of this complex of being able to heal people. I'd probably told you, Sky, but I had a very intense visionary experience there, after which I got like horribly ill for 6 days, and then I got healthy again. I found energy. My persistent GERD went away. I lost 36 pounds, and it was totally unexpected, but it was a really, really cool experience. And yeah, I don't know. Is that what you want me to say?
Yeah, I think that's just really cool. I think it's interesting. I don't get to hear too often people's experiences that have actually been there on the ground, and so
yeah,
it's
I have a technique. Again, I wrote about this in my newsletter, which is free, but a technique for tuning into I would call it the astral environment of a place. I've done that at Glastonbury Tour, at the Sanctuary at Delphi. I've done it at Eleusis or Elefsina, all over the place, in Florence in Italy. That technique is really interesting. I used it for the at the Asclepion at Epithabros, and it had incredible effects. So again, I think it'd be a really cool idea if we did an episode on actual magical techniques, things like that, to help people sort of begin to have these kinds of experiences.
Definitely. Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. I was looking a little bit into like the structure of the different I don't know, like administrative roles or whatever, of just like what went on at the Asclepions. It's not exactly, they have like some crossover with like a Golden Dawn temple or something, for example, but they got like the Hiereus, which would be like the priest, and then there's like temple wardens, and they've got like a guard or guards, and I feel like there's like something that's like with an administrative officer that's kind of correlative to like a scribe or something like this, and then like a fire, or like kind of like a dodochos, but I think it's called a different name in Greek or whatever. But I was trying to look at all of the details of that, because it is interesting how there's a lot of structurally a lot of crossover with that.
Yeah, I want to just point out one last thing. I've been, I take people through various groups through the Iamblichus's curriculum of the Platonic dialogues for like theurgic initiation, and the second one is the Gorgias. And so I'm in the middle of that with a particular group, and it's so funny because like during this Saturn conjunct Neptune time, I'm kind of stuck on these few pages. This is a very dense dialogue. It's a lot of pages, and talks about, he's trying to convince a group of people that tyrants who get away with everything are in worse shape than the people who suffer underneath them. And the reason why is because he uses a comparison to a doctor, right? He says, okay, if a person is sick, they have something in them that's, whatever, exogenous and needs to be removed, they go to a doctor, and the doctor applies something that heals them. Now, that healing is typically painful, but you have to suffer that in order for the doctor to heal you, remove what's infecting you or lodged in you. He says, in the same way, because this ties into everything we're talking about tonight. In the same way, the soul can be afflicted, and the medicine that is applied there is justice, dikaiosine, justice, and discipline, self-control, sophrosine, temperance. He takes the 4 cardinal virtues, which, he really gives us in full force. He presents them formally in the Republic, but he takes the cardinal virtues, and he in various instances shows us how the application of those virtues to our behavior serves as an ordering principle, the same way harmony does to the universe. And in that way, we are embodying the harmony of the cosmos, which, as I said earlier, comes from the mind of God in our person, in our activity, and in our interior sphere. But many of us, especially now during this time, we have to go through the pain of applying justice and discipline to our souls. And he says the tyrant never gets rid of what made his soul sick. So he's actually in worse shape than the people who are suffering under him. So it's quite an interesting thing. I just want to tag that on because it popped in my head.
Yeah, your
Cool.
class on that blew my mind when you got into some of the stuff, especially with like sophistry and those. I might have been the Gorgias where it was elaborating on that, but that was one of the best texts.
Someone had a super chat question we missed from the Elixir. Thank you very much for the super chats. Someone also mentioned that they can't super chat or donate. You go through our videos and give us a bunch of likes on our videos. That has a disproportionate effect on channels like ours. Share a video if you can, but just going through a bunch of our videos each, liking them, dear Lord, that has a huge effect. You can change any creator's life. Though I despise that term creator, but that's the term anyway, whatever. You can change anyone's life by liking someone's videos can change their life. It's crazy, but that's what the algorithm favors these days, more than views, even more than, well, watch time's the ultimate, but likes, dear Lord, they really use that as the metric to know whether or not to share our videos and stuff. So go through our channels, give us a bunch of likes. That's, I don't want to say more valuable than dollar bills, but you know, it's comparable. It's pretty close. So thank you. And the Elixir says, I'm confused. So are there negative entities separate from us, or is it just in our head or a construct of our minds? I mean, so if everything is contained in nous and the soul and God, it's all then. That's what Lon Milo DeKet means when he says it's all in your head. You just don't know how big your head is, because he's talking about your head as being the nous, which connects with the monad. So that's what he means. And people were debating whether he meant that for years, my whole life, since he said that. And then I got on my podcast, asked him point blank, he confirmed. And then I tried to share it with everyone. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to watch a whole video of you guys talking. Like, it's a 10-minute clip. And they're like, yeah, but why don't you just tell me? It's like, dude, this is a breakthrough in understanding these guys. But yeah, Lon says he agrees with everything Stephen Skinner says about spirits. So that tells you a lot. Right? Because Skinner's very clear. And when Lon says he's talking about the mind, he's talking about this idea of the mind is in the nous. So yes, there's kakodaimones in the Hermetica and in ancient thought, and they're in our bodies, they're in everything. There's millions of them in us and around us and in the whole world. This is where Scientology got the idea from, right? L. Ron Hubbard got this from Hermetic thought, which he got from Jack Parsons. Someone earlier was saying something about Ghislaine's sister being married to Jack Parsons' daughter, something weird. That was crazy. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean,
super chat.
I can chip in on that as well. I think that not on the Jack Parsons thing, on the are they in our head? Yeah, I think that there is an aspect to them that we would call external. You know, when we're still in the paradigm of not realizing that there's just one very big head that everything is in. Like we can experience entities that are external to us, that are demonic. But I think all the important work with that happens with how it does manifest in our own psychology, and that tends to be how we interact with them most of the time. And if you get your own house in order and you able to overcome your own inner demons, then that means that there's less vulnerabilities for anything external to come in and infiltrate you and influence you. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I want to point something out too, and I'll plug an audiobook that I did. It's the Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings by the 18th century founder of the Enochian, Martina de Pasquale. Posthumously published. He reinterprets certain passages of the Old Testament, and he says something very interesting that when I read it for the first time, it made my head ring like a bell. And he says that the fall from Eden effectively rendered the human soul a pensive being. Right? This came from a French translation, pensar, to think. What does he mean by pensive being? Well, I did the audiobook for Michael R. Osborne's translation of the Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings. And the thinking being is effectively that which is open to provocation and influence from either the kakodaimones or the Agathodaimones, right? The guides of good counsel, or the malevolent or impure spirits. And it's this classic trope, because it does exist in Hermetism, and it does exist in late Platonism, and it does exist in Middle Platonism. This idea of, the devil on one shoulder, angel on the other, it's far greater than anything. Like, a lot of people just associate that with Christianity, but this is a very, very big part of understanding the nature of the soul and how to navigate reality for pagan philosophy, religio-philosophical traditions. And it's effectively Pasquale interpreting this stuff through that, like, 18th century Catholic lens. He basically says, the only thing we can do is listen to one voice or the other and act, and thereby we become their instrument, and either an instrument for good or for ill. And that, to me, even if it's not 100% literal, is real fucking important. Real important if you're going to be doing any of this shit.
Here, 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 here. The last super chat we have is, what place does music have in esoteric praxis? What are your favorite Nickelback songs? So music, obviously, we've addressed that in the Hermetica. The singing or vibrating of these letters and sounds is crucial in their primary ritual that we have in the Hermetica texts. So it plays a huge role. I do actually tell, though, my students and initiates in the GD tradition to generally not avoid music when you're doing your ritual work. If you want to have it for ceremonies or major events, I think that's fine. But I've known a lot of people who say, I always do my ritual work with this one album. I start it and time it, and I do every transition at certain points in the album. And I said, you really should stop doing that. And he was very traumatized by that. He was very upset, very unpleased. And I'm like, look, you don't do it just because I'm telling you to do it. But here's my reason, which is, like, part of the thing we do in ritual work, especially in Golden Dawn ritual work, especially if you're doing things like modern versions of the middle pillar, which are designed to open up the astral and psychic senses. Well, how are you going to train your clairaudience, your ability to hear spirits, if you're focused on music and a song? Right? To me, it just seems like my sense of hearing the cosmos or the music of the spheres would be blocked out by having a CD on. So that's my point of view. If you want to develop your senses, as few distractions as possible is good. It's why, we like dark spaces and confined environments for a lot of our practices, so that we can see subtle changes in them to detect spirit sign or other phenomena or astral shapes and designs and energies moving with our physical eyes even. So that's my answer. And favorite Nickelback song, there's only one good Nickelback song, and you know what it is. It's the post-grunge anthem of the 20th century. And don't make me sing it, because we'll get a copyright strike.
Does
Though
the
I
song
did get I do have a funny story about Chad Kroger and me, if you want to hear it later or next time.
I do want to hear it, but I'm going to ask him if the song "Hero" that was recorded for the original Spider-Man soundtrack, does that count as Nickelback, or is that just Chad Kroger?
Sure.
Okay, then that's my favorite Nickelback song.
Fair enough. There's some conspiracy going on right now, I've noticed, about, like, why Nickelback, we stopped listening to Nickelback after the year 2001 after 9/11. Anyway, it seems like a weird conspiracy to me, because when I met him, he says he's from Vancouver, but he's from Alberta, Calgary, or whatever. But he lived here, and his record label's here, and I was in the industry for a long time. Yeah. You can't really say we stopped listening to him at 9/11, because in 2011 he still had the biggest selling album, and that's what he was bitching about. He was bitching about Arcade Fire, who had just won the Grammy, and he was just going on a tirade to a group of us in the parking lot, just ranting about them. And I actually had my iPhone on record, because I was actually there as a music journalist. And then at one point he looked at me and he said, are you recording this? And in that environment, I tell you, if they found me recording what the shit he was saying there, I might be barely lucky to survive. I would definitely have ended up in the hospital, guaranteed. But I had my girlfriend's iPhone because she was on set doing fire eating for My Darkest Days music video, Move Your Body, or that's what it was called. I think you can see her in it eating fire. So I was there doing fire safety for her and doing a bit of journalism because that's what I did. And fortunately, so I pulled out from my phone pocket her iPhone, then not knowing that mine was in the other pocket recording. And ironically, I never got to write a story and quote him because a couple nights later, I played a gig and on the way home, dropped my phone and lost my iPhone 3. So, and the rest of that night did play out very well. It turned out I was the only one there with weed. So he took me off to a bathroom where we smoked my entire bag of weed and he showed me his penis. It's huge.
Wow. That's
All right.
amazing.
Wow. Okay. I do want to mention, I'm going to take time to just plug my course real quick.
Speaking of penises.
Speaking of dicks, I did a whole course. I did 7 modules, 2.5 to 3 hours long on nothing but Nickelback, baby. No, it was it's what's the class that Sky was talking about called Music as Magic. It's for sale now. It's for sale for under $200. There's like fucking 30 hours of information, extremely high value. Hit me up if you want to buy it. Because I just spent the better part of 3 months talking about all this stuff, and I can't talk about it more. So if you want to like a full deep dive on all that stuff, from my perspective, check that course out, Music as Magic.
Check out Ike's courses, people. I guess I'll shout out one of mine. I have a course on Enochian magic that's different from the methods I usually use, which is Golden Dawn methods, different from Eleftheria as well. We come from Thelemic and Golden Dawn traditions. So I did a course though on like how to get people into the old purist traditional approach prior to it getting altered by modern traditions. So if anyone's interested in that, as a result, it also serves as a grimoiric introduction to grimoiric magic and old school magic because it's more simple and based on, well, it's not simpler. It's just different things matter than matter in modern day practices. Now, that said, I want it to also be clear. I think, I don't want to speak for your brother, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's safe to say that the main approaches we use with Enochian magic, like anyone with our level of experience, is going to be a mixture of many things, all based on what we found works the best. Because I've seen your setup and it's a beautiful little hybrid expression of you and looks absolutely delightful. So, don't change.
Yeah.
Oh, and go to EnochianGrimoire.com to get my course. Cheers. Thanks. We got to remember to shout out our stuff.
I think that the challenge with Enochian magic as well is, we don't have all of the information that Dee and Kelly had. So, we find ourselves filling in the blanks as we try to reconstruct things quite often. So, in a sense, yeah, it is inevitable that even when we're trying to create something that's like a Dee purist kind of approach to Enochian magic, there's going to be some innovation that's going on there.
That's the approach that's the approach my course takes. I should actually send you a thing for it so you can check it out. I know Dr. Burns and a lot of great people have checked it out at this point and used it to guide them in their book writing or practice or whatever. But yeah, because it's that's why I think it's so good as a beginner entry point to grimoire magic, because you have to fill in some blanks. That trains you to know sort of from a building block perspective what things are expected in a grimoire. And so when you're working with other grimoires, which are mostly complete, you'll have a sense of what you might be able to take away and add, better than if you started with a grimoire that's pristine, such as the Arbitel. It was written by someone or a group of people, it was published, and there's no manuscript variations whatsoever. It was published in 1575, and that's what it is. So I think Enochian is actually, I agree with Lon on that. It's a great entry point to magic, not necessarily beginner entry point, start with some other things, maybe prayer and meditation, But yeah, it's a great entry point to grimoire magic because it demands a little bit more of you than some of the other grimoires, which just tell you what to do step by step. What's the SRA? I'm a Rosicrucian initiate that went through the SRA, after which kind of makes it more personal, been kind of lost ever since. I don't know. I mean, you couldn't mean the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia because that's men only. So I don't know what the SRA is, Elixir. But if you want to let us know in the comments, we'll find out. We're coming to the end, folks. I got to resume my role as frontman this month. Someone else will be frontman next time. Scott Stenwick, thoughts on Scott Michael Stenwick's, quickly throw that back up. Thoughts on Scott Michael Stenwick. He'll be at EnochiaCon this year doing a crazy course on how to use the cacodemons to get rich. It's a technique he swears by and has used and can demonstrate, and I do know him well enough to claim that he's not lying when he makes those claims, though he made more to me in private than I've shared online. But yeah, the EnochiaCon course by Scott Stenwick's going to be off the charts because most of us avoid working with the demons in the Enochian system because we think, well, what's the use? We don't want to cause cancer in someone or anything like that. But he pointed out that the ones of rock and gem and stone clearly might have some role to play, and I won't say more than that, but go to EnochiaCon.com, people, to register for EnochiaCon and for the spring workshop that's in Austin, Texas, and online while early enrollment discount is still on. Scott Stenwick's use of the LIRH instead of the LBRH. Yeah, so he's just correct about the Golden Dawn system, in which we usually use the invoking form and less often use the banishing form. Now, the way in which he lines up the rituals in all those formats, it's based on a slightly different fundamental understanding of what the rituals do than the traditional system of the Golden Dawn presents. However, I've worked with a lot of his recommendations for the last 5 years, and I found delightful little effects and different experiences from them. So I highly recommend Scott Stenwick's books. Just keep in mind his approach to the hexagram and pentagram rituals of the Golden Dawn is slightly different. It's slightly different. It's based on slightly different premises, and that's why you would find discrepancy between how he talks about them versus how Nick Farrell or someone like that would talk about them, because it's a slightly altered tradition, but still great, and he goes deep into it. So we always love people that go deep, right?
We do.
All right. Any last comments? Well, I think we're any last comments worth addressing? No, so many of them are worth addressing. We just don't have the time. Thank you everyone for being here. This has been such a great chat. We've had like 50 to 100 people the whole time across all our channels. And there's been lots of fun in the comments. I've noticed someone call for a moderator. We would each need a moderator each for our separate own YouTubes, because it's so and none of us are at the stage where we're so big that it's like, floods of like detritus in the comments. Like there's just the odd cheeky people or the odd repeater, like Vincent here repeating The Godfather and over and over. That just dilutes the comments. It just in my opinion, that just dilutes the conversation. And I get it, I love it, but if we want to have a more active, healthy community, self-regulation's in good order so we can build something together here, build the mystery.
I'll throw out something real quick before we sign off. If anybody wants to listen to me babble, I'll be on the Occult Rejects podcast next month at some point. I'm not exactly sure. Do you remember, Ike, when that was? I think it's early next month. Yeah.
Sorry. I'll try and get on just to like ask you questions, because you're usually asking me questions.
That sounds good. But yeah, that's all for me. This was awesome. I freaking love doing this with you guys.
Here's a recommendation that we for a format 1 month, something Behind the Bastards, but on the occult. I don't know what Behind the Bastards is. Do you guys know what that is?
No.
I don't know what that is. Yeah, shoot us another message. Thanks for the additional little super chat here. And I saw the comments about the elves. It's just there's not much context for that. Like, elves are considered spirits. There's a whole There's many magical texts, I'm sure, that address them. We have like the Grimoire of Oberon, the Book of Magic, as it's called. And I love elves and fairies and all those earthy spirits and all that stuff.
Every
They
time
definitely
I
would be considered.
every time I look at the comments, I see something from Richard that just makes me like I have to like choke back laughter like the entire night. The last like 3.5 hours.
Oh, here's a fun question. What's the most useful non-English language to learn?
Ooh.
Useful
Arabic.
for what?
Depends what you want to do.
Yeah.
For what? It's like saying what's the most useful tool to have in your house, or the most useful, I don't know. Yeah, it depends what, non-English language. I mean, if you want to translate magic text, German or French. If you want to study ancient texts, Latin, Greek, or Hebrew or Coptic. Greek's a useful one, but again, it depends what you want to do. It really does depend. And don't need to talk about the Rose Cross ritual. Thank you for the stream. Yeah, we'll just get back to the thanks and good wishes. Many blessings, and thank you. Yeah, thank you. Lots of rabbit holes. We love that. We're here to have fun, inspire you guys, and share what we know with each other as well, because we all study and practice and teach and do all kinds of things, and getting to get together once a month is such a great idea to share our passion and love of the mysteries with each other. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sky, for kicking this whole thing off last month. What a great idea it turned out to be, eh? And I was glad to be frontman this week. Maybe Ike or Eleftheria can be frontman next month and hog the spotlight, and that would be fun too. And I'll check out on the recording online how the transition videos played, because they were choppy from the back end here, but that could just be because we're in the control room and it's a bit different. And hopefully they looked okay. And we're going to work on a fun intro video with sound effects and lights and colors and cool things. We've made some fun graphics behind the scene we'll never be able to show you guys, but that's I'm just referencing that to let you know that the ideas are percolating. We're using this all as a creative outlet, as well as a chance to spend good fraternal time loving each other and sharing that love with everyone in the world.
Amen.
Well said.
Alrighty.
Any
Till
last
next
words,
time.
my comrades? No. All right. Well, we don't have an outro video, so I programmed the Thanksgiving prayer to be our outro. So we'll end on the prayer of Thanksgiving, which is absolutely apropos of this stream. And thank you for the final. You get the final comment here. Interesting. Thank you there. Lurking is fine. Lurking is good in this context. Yeah, they keep coming in. Cool. Yes, social medias are included in the description, and they should be for the most part. We're all on a lot of platforms, so we don't necessarily include everything. But if you go to our YouTubes, you'll find all of our stuff. We all have mailing lists and websites and do a lot. We're all very active. That's why we have time to do this. We wouldn't do this if we weren't busy people. It's only because we're such busy people that we are able to schedule and arrange this all. And thanks again, of course, to Eleftheria for waking up bright and early in the morning to be here with us in the northern hemisphere on the top of the planet. Get it?
Shit, I couldn't imagine like starting my day with like us. Like I'm about to end it.
No, you're a braver man than all of us, man.
I'm just very passionate about the work, I guess.
Well, you got no choice. You're the one down under. Yeah, I'm just sort of jealous. I'm in Canada. It's not as warm as it is down south with you. Down under. All right, that's it, everybody. Thanks for being here on Arcana Synaxis Part 2. Part 3 will be announced when it's announced. And have a wonderful day or morning wherever you are in the world or cosmos. And give thanks to the Lord, the Father, the One, the gods and spirits of the desert, and to our own higher souls. Amen.
There it is. Amen.
We render you thanks, most high and potent God, for it is only by your grace that we have come to the light of your knowledge. Holy and reverend is your name, the one name by which God alone is to be praised, according to the religion of our fathers. We do indeed thank you, since you deign to give all beings your paternal care, your religion, and your love, and even sweeter. Upon us you have bestowed these powers, perception, reason, and intelligence. Perception that we may recognize you, reason that we may follow up our intuition, and knowledge that in knowing you we may find joy. Having been saved by your divine power, we rejoice because you have shown yourself to us in your totality. We rejoice because while we are still in these bodies, you deign to consecrate us for eternity. This is the only way human beings have of giving thanks, to acknowledge your majesty. We have known you and the supreme light by conscious intelligence alone. We understand you. O true life of life, O fertile womb of all that has come into being. O eternal steadfastness, we have known you in your conception of the whole of abundant nature, in every prayer through which we reverence the good of all good. We plead only for this, that you may wish us to continue to serve you in the love of your knowledge, and that we may never be separated from this kind of life.